stand by. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Global Engagement Forum broadcast. I'm C.D. Glenn. I won't be your sage on the stage, but rather your guide on the side. We have a great selection of speakers lined up for you, and we're looking forward to kicking it off in just a minute. It's exciting to have so many people tuning in online for this conversation from all over the world, from right here in Washington, D.C., to Nigeria, Tanzania, Benin, and Cambodia, where it's currently 10 p.m. So thank you, Cambodia. No problem if you're tuning in with your PJs or your nightgown. We invite you to join the online conversation via Twitter with hashtag SDGForum. We're excited to have the United Nations moderating the online conversation. Follow their lead at UN Foundation. Over the course of the morning, you'll hear from leaders in business, government, and the social sector talking about their efforts to lead sustainable social impact. We're also joined today by 3 social entrepreneurs who will be sharing with you their social innovations to combat hunger, malaria, and waste. I'm excited to introduce our first guest, Kathy Calvin, the CEO of the United Nations Foundation, who was actively involved in the process of launching the global goals this fall, and Sheryl WuDunn, whose latest book, A Path Appears, offers up stories about how people like you have made a difference in advancing social change. They'll be speaking with our very own Deirdre White, Pyxera Global CEO, in just a moment. But before then, here's one way you can get involved right now. Take a look.
Hi, I'm Jack Black. I'm here to talk about the Earth.
This is not about a celebrity inspiring you to take part, or a company trying to sell you something. This isn't about the Pope, or Lil Bub, or a cute internet hedgehog. This isn't even about saving the spotted owl, or a tree, or even a country. This is about all of us. Everything we know, everyone we love, and our survival. Never before have we had to face a challenge as big as climate change. And never before have we had a moment like this, with the awareness, the will, and the technology to fight it. This is the turning point. This December, the Paris Climate Conference will bring together leaders and experts from over 190 nations to combat climate change. But the outcome remains unclear, which is why world leaders need to hear from us now. Use the hashtag to send a message from Earth to Paris. Tweet, Instagram, march, paint, sing. Bring your voice and your creativity. Tell our leaders to make bold commitments to combat climate change. It's time for world leaders to hear from the world.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Deirdre White. I'm the CEO of Pyxera Global, and I'm delighted to have you all watching this broadcast from across the world. I'm thrilled to be joined by Kathy Calvin and Sheryl WuDunn this morning to kick us off and to share some of our thoughts about the Sustainable Development Goals and why they're important and what some of the challenges are. As CD said, Kathy's been very, very involved in the development of the goals through the United Nations Foundation from the beginning. So I'm actually going to turn to Kathy first and ask you to tell us, what are the Sustainable Development Goals? The community we live in knows a lot about them, but we have thousands of people watching this who may never have heard of the goals before. What are the Sustainable Development Goals and why should we care?
Great. Well, thank you, Deirdre. It's good to be here with you and Sheryl. And thank you for all your community is doing already to make these goals famous. When we created the Millennium Development Goals 15 years ago, it took 5 years for the awareness to even start to sink in, and then really all 15 years to take on trying to make sure we got to those goals. These goals are being launched with more awareness, more engagement, and more participation. So I'll give you 3 quick numbers. 195 nations came together to create the goals and get them onto one piece of paper, which is pretty remarkable. And it was an inclusive process that led to engagement by citizens and young people and business leaders and civil society. Everybody had a say in trying to create what the goals were. And it led us to 17 goals, which sounds like a lot, but 17 goals reflects the complexity of our world and the fact that we're already working on so many steps to make sure that we are taking care of people and planet, that we're making sure we're taking care of the environment and poverty and justice, rights for all, that we're doing this in a universal fashion. We're not just thinking about the poorest countries in the world, but the poorest places anywhere in the United States, Brazil, Cambodia, you name it. And finally, this is a set of goals, and my last number, after 195 and 17, is 3. It will take all 3 sectors, and you've been a genius at identifying how critical this is, that this is no longer the work of governments, although it must require governments. It's no longer the work of governments in partnership just with civil society, although it will still be there. We absolutely need the private sector, not as charity, not as civil social responsibility only, but really core commitment to building the bridges, adding to the agriculture, making sure there's a sustainable and growing economy everywhere in the world. And so congratulations to you for this piece of paper that also sort of shows how we look at all 17 goals, but how they all come together in a really unique way. They were adopted in September. They will be starting to be implemented in January, and that's really both where the fun starts and the hard work starts. Every country will have to come up with its own national plan, and there's a lot of opportunity for all of us to be engaged in pushing for adoption, in bringing technology toward adoption, and making sure that we don't keep climate and development as 2 separate tracks. Today they have to be together, as you just saw from the Paris video. When we finish the work of this year in Paris with the climate negotiations, we will have a full agenda that includes development, climate, and financing to meet both.
Great, thank you. Well, you know, it's interesting, you talk about implementation and we talk about this cross-sector, what we call tri-sector partnership, public-private social sector partnership. And we think of these sort of colossal partnerships and really big, bold projects, and we're going to require a lot of those. But we have also a lot of individuals watching that are not part of those kind of partnerships. And Sheryl, you're so passionate about what one individual can do. Can you tell us a little bit about how can individuals that are watching do something to drive us toward progress against the goals?
Well, actually, I'd like to comment on some of the things
Sure.
that Kathy said, and I do think that these goals, it is a remarkable accomplishment given all of the backstory, negotiations, the politicization of the goals as well. And that's just to be, you know, a fact of life, given that there were so many countries involved, and I know how difficult it is. I think that also it's important to understand that while it is 70 goals because it reflects the complex society, one of the problems that one faces with 17 goals is that, oh, well, if we don't make one, that's okay because we made 16 others. And so which one gets left by the wayside? With the Millennium Development Goals, I mean, depending upon, Kathy, as you've said before, how you measure, you know, maybe maternal mortality that goal was never met anywhere in the world, but others in certain parts of the world were not met, others overachieved in other countries. So I think that it's going to be very important to make sure that the accountability remains there for every single country, for all of those 17 goals. The other interesting thing is that I know that there was so much negotiation behind these goals, but I just think some of it is kind of interesting. So for instance, terrestrial ecosystems got into goal number 15, but mental illness, mental health, which is so essential to humankind, if we don't have mental health, we have nothing, we are nothing. It's what we are. Our emotional world is what we are, and that's nowhere, anywhere. So I thought it was very interesting that, you know, certain things got in and certain things didn't get in. So I do hope that people who are in areas such as mental health will keep trying to, you know, bubble up those agendas, and the countries who are trying to implement these things will recognize the importance of certain things that just didn't get in. But it is going to be hard because there are so many other targets and goals, and you've mentioned hundreds of targets that also are behind these goals. So I do agree with you that the work ahead is going to be extremely important. So what can individuals do? I mean, this is something that seems so bureaucratic, it seems so complicated. What do I have anything to do with any of these goals? I guess what I would say is that take something that you care about. One of these goals, there's got to be something in one of these 17 goals, or something that might be not so articulated, such as mental health, and just cling to it and say, well, this is something that I want to focus on in my daily life. And I might, have my own career. I'm not going to drop everything to go and focus on one of these goals, but I'm going to try and incorporate this goal into my daily life. Maybe, spread the word about it through my friends, my Facebook page, my social media, my Twitter, or volunteer for an organization that, I care about and I have friends doing it with me. Yep. I think that if everyone does that, we are going to get to a mass amount of people. But it does start with that individual person.
Can I just add to that? Because I couldn't agree more. It is the fourth sector, actually. And I think, there's a website called globalcitizen.org. Don't be a bystander is the theme they're using, which is, I think, just right to Sheryl's point. You don't want to, there's a place for all of us. And it's okay to focus on one goal, understanding that the 17 represent a framework. So they recognizing where they intersect, because you can find things that affect adolescent girls across many of the goals, not just in the gender goal. And so thinking creatively and looking for opportunities to push those forward is also important. And finally, I think everyone has the responsibility to make sure our governments, whether it's in the United States, because this is a universal set of goals, or in other countries, really understand citizens are watching, they're holding governments accountable. When the goals were adopted in September at the General Assembly, Malala was in the balcony with 195 young people representing the countries that were just voting on the goals. And she spoke from the balcony and said, please turn around and look up. These are the people who you are making promises to, and we will be watching and holding you accountable. It was a very powerful moment. So I think we all have to take that responsibility on.
Well, so there's some level to which we can hold governments accountable, but we said this is tri-sector partnerships, and then we said there's a fourth sector as well. But how are we holding business accountable, and how are we holding civil society accountable? What are we going to measure this against?
Well, I think that when you focus on that fourth sector, the individuals, if everyone takes ownership of something, then at least they'll be vested in it, more vested in it, and then they will work with their colleagues if they're at the UN or if they're even at a corporation. That will actually move us a lot forward toward getting everyone, all the other sectors and the institutions involved, because it starts with the individual. We often forget, government, this big entity, or corporations, they're made up of people, of individuals. If you don't reach those individuals, they're not going to move anything forward. And so we do have to remember that you have to reach out to people and get their involvement on an emotional basis.
Well, it's interesting you say that about the people, and also just looking at businesses. One thing that we've noticed is we hear this narrative in the world that we live in, this sort of development community, that everyone knows about the goals, that everyone's paying attention, that so many businesses are on board. And it's just not true. There are individuals, and it's the same individuals over and over again in those businesses that are involved and that know about the goals. So if it's the same 100 businesses at the table, we're not going to make any progress. How do we get more people involved? How do we get more businesses to make commitments? How do we get more civil society to understand how they're going to have to work in partnership with government and with business?
Yeah, we actually just polled in the US right after the goals were adopted, and 22% said they had heard of the goals, which I thought was shockingly high. Don't know if that number will hold, 1 in 5, but that's not a bad place to start. But we have to do so much more work to keep the goals on people's minds and testing against them. I've been really impressed with the companies who have already stepped forward and identified ways that they can show leadership, build it into their marketing, build it into their development of new products, and thinking about their employees, their supply chains, and their customers as all part of an infrastructure that should be developed with the goals in mind. And I think that's a critical way to think about it. So the goals are a framework that everyone can use. It's not, I can't see companies necessarily saying the goal, I'm working specifically on this goal, but my work is aiming toward getting progress toward that goal. And I think that's what we're starting to see. We're working with a group of companies and governments who are trying to put together the business case for working on the goals that identifies all the different ways companies can get engaged, from using least of all their philanthropic dollars, and most of all their products, services, and business plans globally. I mean, this is the clearest message we learned, and Sheryl and I were talking about this backstage, is that the way that China and India achieved so much progress on the Millennium Development Goals was that they grew their economies out of poverty into the middle class. A growing economy, reduction of fragile states and conflict areas where inevitably we don't see progress on these goals will make a huge difference. And then get companies going into those countries, which right now they're not incentivized to do. So I think technology is going to be a big piece of it. And I think we're seeing a whole new generation of business leaders who are coming on, who will find this to be a great way to connect their work to a global platform.
I think that in many ways that when you're talking about institutions, how do you spread the word? I think it really has to be that these goals align with their self-interest, because
Exactly.
they're just not going to take on an additional goal and sustain that effort, in the long run. If it fits with their self-interest, their promotion of whatever their products, their services, then they're more likely to be able to, oh yeah, we'll just add this in because it dovetails, it aligns with what we're interested in as well. So they may not, everyone, each institution is not going to be able to do all 17. Hopefully at the country level they will, because it is in the country's, all of these goals are in the country's self-interest. But I think that, each corporation, organization, institution in their own world can actually harness the goals that fit with their world. And then hopefully, because we are an entire world, we'll be able to push forward each of these 17 goals.
And you're probably seeing what we are, which is that when we used to say public-private partnerships, we sort of thought, the corporation and civil society, or the corporation and government. But we're seeing now business-to-business partnerships that are really exciting. They're putting together, even where they might be in competition in one space, they're cooperating in another. It's a kind of co-opetition model that I think is really exciting, because many companies sort of have the same goal in a country of finding better educated employees, healthier environment for the current employees. We're even working with some companies right now about where to bring in the issue of reproductive health for their employees. What a great use of a company looking for the health of its individual employees, and also helping to end one of the worst areas of lack of progress, reproductive health and maternal death.
So it doesn't need to be altruism.
Right.
In fact, it shouldn't be
Shouldn't be.
altruism. It actually, we have to have this element of self-interest, particularly where we are working with the corporate sector. Last question before we sign off to another segment. What are the biggest challenges we're going to face in doing this, and how are we going to overcome them? You've referred to the goals as a vision, and that's exactly what they are. End poverty is really difficult to quantify as a goal. It's a vision. What challenges are we going to face in getting to those bold visions on your paper?
Right. So implementation is hard, and I think we have to take some steps toward getting there, and not assume we're going to get there overnight. And so I think the first thing is looking to see what steps they're taking already. And there's some really interesting stuff already happening. Bringing the parliaments in to be engaged, identifying a high-level person in charge of thinking it through and linking the various ministries that all have to be part of the process, and making sure there's an ongoing dialogue with citizens. If we see those things starting to happen in countries, I think we'll get over the biggest hurdle, which is where to start.
Last words to you, Sheryl.
I do think that people have to care. And I think that countries that may be really far behind that some of these goals were made for, they have to care too. And then resources is going to be an issue, because a lot of these countries just don't have the resources. So are we, in the wealthy part of the world, going to help them? So we need to straighten out those issues as well, because it does take resources. I mean, people, money and time to implement these goals.
Well, thank you very much for kicking us off in such a great fashion.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's great. It was so great to have Kathy and Sheryl here with us this morning to open the show. And you heard it. You heard it straight from global leaders. Don't be a bystander. Countries, companies, communities connecting to this global platform. The SDGs, now you know. I hope you enjoyed that. And you can tell us what you really thought about it, that opening segment, at hashtag SDG Forum. And of course, you can tweet your questions to our upcoming guests at the same hashtag, and we'll make sure we get your questions answered. You can also tweet your climate-related comments on today's events at hashtag Earth to Paris to ensure you're heard in advance of the Paris Climate Summit next month. So while large organizations are doing a lot to advance the goals, social entrepreneurs are also playing an important role. In some cases, they're leading the way. Next up, I'm very excited to introduce our first social entrepreneur who will be talking about food security, an issue close to my own heart in the work I lead for the Rockefeller Foundation. Shobita Soor is the Chief Impact Officer and co-founder of Aspire Food Group, a 2013 Holt Prize winner that is working to make insects delicious across 2 continents, from Texas to Ghana. Here's Shobita.
Hi, my name is Shobita Soor, and I am the co-founder of Aspire Food Group. Aspire Food Group is an international social enterprise that aims to achieve food security worldwide through the sustainable farming of edible insects. Yes, edible insects. As we gear up to think about how we're going to feed 9 billion people in just a few short decades, we're also reminded that there is a reduction in arable land, that food prices are rising, that people are moving to the cities, and that resources are really constrained. Aspire was born out of the Holt Prize. The Holt Prize is one of the largest crowdfunding platforms in the world. Every year, President Clinton puts out a challenge to students all across the world and asks them to come up with a social business that addresses a world issue. The year my team and I participated, the challenge was food insecurity. And it was through our participation in that process that we came across this very interesting phenomena that insects are one of the most underutilized resources when it comes to achieving food security or thinking about world hunger. Today, we operate in 2 countries. We operate in the United States and in Ghana. Over 2 billion people consume insects worldwide. However, there are serious issues with accessibility and with edible insects worldwide. The first issue is that the current practice really surrounds itself around the hand harvesting of insects. That means that labor costs are very high and the price often is much more expensive than traditional livestock or traditional protein sources. The other issue is the availability of insects and the supply of edible insects. Through the current practice, which is really, again, around the hand harvesting of them, we find that they're only available seasonally, and that often over-harvesting in one season makes them less available thereafter. Now, where things get really interesting is with the farming of edible insects instead of the harvesting of edible insects. So, and that's really what we seek to do. When you are involved in edible insect production, there is drastically less land used, less water used, and less feed used. And the amount of CO2 that's emitted into the environment is negligible. And this is really for either a similar amount of protein and nutrition, or in certain cases, a far superior amount of nutrition, specifically when it comes to iron and calcium and magnesium and zinc, really essential minerals. And this was really the idea that enabled my team and I to win the $1 million of seed capital that came along with our Halt Prize victory in 2013. As I mentioned earlier, we operate in both the United States and in Ghana. So in Ghana, what we do is we farm something called the palm weevil larva. It looks like shrimp, as you can see, and it tastes like sausage, I promise. The palm weevil larva is really an exceptional superfood. It packs a lot of protein. It has essential fatty acids that are crucial to brain development in the first few years of life. And it has a really high concentration of iron. So our target market in Ghana is really people who are nutrition security vulnerable, people who have difficulty having stable access to animal protein, people who have difficulty getting really the basic amount of nutrients that they do. And so we really are committed to keeping our prices very low, competitive with things like canned fish, to be able to really target our, to be able to reach our target market. Being involved in Ghana, we also identified that there are certain regions where accessibility to markets or to food markets is difficult. And so we have started to empower close to 500 farmers in both peri-urban and rural areas to be able to farm their own insects to really increase their stable access to animal protein, which is sometimes non-existent, and at the same time increase their opportunities for income, so they're often able to sell it as well. The Halt Prize enabled us to scale in more countries than one at a time. So all the way across the world, we also operate in the United States. Here, we farm crickets. And our flagship product, Akeda, is sold in two varieties. We have a powdered form and we have whole cricket form. And what we do is we sell to businesses and consumers who use these products to fortify things like granola bars, protein bars, crackers, chips, and so on and so forth. Now, we really feel like if insect eating is going to become a worldwide phenomena, it was important for us to really push this market in North America and Europe, where really many food trends begin and many food trends die. We want this to be a mainstream way of eating all around the world. And how we're going to get there is through product development. We truly believe that having innovative products that are insect-based, since they're so resource efficient, will allow us to make edible insect eating mainstream. It will allow us to relieve the current environmental impact of the food industry on our resources globally by shifting people away from meat products to edible insect products. We have found that across the world, when you ask people why they eat the foods that they eat, there are two main reasons. One is because they taste good, and the second is because they're good for them. And so by innovating on the product development side and coming out with products that are very familiar in texture and in flavor to what we're already used to, we're able to really make this a worldwide phenomena. We're hoping that edible insects is what sushi was 2 or 3 decades ago, where the idea of eating raw fish was vile, and today you can't go a couple of blocks without seeing a sushi restaurant. A couple of the things that got us to where we are today are, one, we had a mindset of piloting very cheaply and quickly in a new market. We identified what are the crucial questions we need to ask to be able to see if we can exist in this market in this country or not. We asked, is there a farmable insect? Is there a desired insect? And is there a willingness to pay for that insect? And that really informed our ability to be able to operate both in the United States and in Ghana. The other thing that we did, which I really recommend for any international social enterprise, was we partnered with local academic institutions. So in Ghana, we have a great partnership with the University of Ghana and Noost University. And I think that this approach is really valuable, especially when you're operating in an industry where there's so much that is unknown, where there's so much that still has to be determined. We're able to partner with those research institutions to identify what is the best feed to feed these insects, what are the ways in which we can process the insects to have a longer and more stable shelf life. For Aspire, we're not done. We still have a long way to go. We aspire for the future, for there to be, for us to operate in several different countries. One of the main ways that we anticipate doing this is we anticipate exporting the palm weevil larvae to other West African countries, and to also be able to teach the same way that we've been able to empower the farmers in Ghana to be able to do that in other West African countries where there are palm trees, where this insect has been harvested in the past, and where there really is an opportunity for us as well on the product development side. We truly believe that insects are the food of the future, and that they are a food that will poise the way that is really poised to change the way we eat, and that is really poised to achieve zero hunger worldwide. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Shobita. Fascinating, truly fascinating. Who knew insect larvae could do so much good? I ate my Wheaties this morning, but I could have had Prickett granola. I mean, come on. Shobita wants to hear from you. And don't worry about being a pest or bugging her. As you heard, she enjoys that. Tell her what you think about Aspire's work. She's looking forward to hearing from everyone. At #SDG Forum. Next up, we've got a great conversation focused specifically on the environment in a segment brought to you by the Dow Chemical Company. Nature Vest, a new partnership between the Nature Conservancy and JPMorgan Chase, seeks to raise an investment fund specifically focused on nature, and you can invest today. At the same time, Dow and the Nature Conservancy have been working together to discover the value of nature to business. Here's a look inside that partnership.
We live in a time when most businesses seem aware of their impact and dependency on the environment. But far fewer understand how to value the services that nature provides them.
There's a whole range of benefits that we get from nature and that we couldn't possibly live without. The production of food, our energy, our fresh and clean water, protection from flooding, from climate change, our jobs. Just about everything we get traces its origin in one way or another to nature.
Often, nature's value is only recognized once it's gone. Our window of opportunity to make a difference is now.
It's really important for conservation groups to work with big corporations. That's because they're producing and using so much. If you can just make them a little bit more efficient, you can create a vast amount of change, a vast amount of improvement in a way that would be much faster than trying to sort of exert that control from the bottom or even in opposition to those kind of companies. And so if you can get into the DNA of those companies and get them to shift some of their practices, you can make a really big difference.
In January 2011, the Nature Conservancy, the Dow Chemical Company, and its foundation came together to develop a roadmap for how companies can put nature on their balance sheets. When companies know how to account for nature, they can incorporate it into decision-making, manage resources better, and look for ways to protect it.
We've talked about the value of nature. We're taking it a big step forward. We're saying, okay, let's roll up our sleeves now. Dow engineers, together with Nature Conservancy scientists, really doing the hard work of assessing what is Dow's dependence on natural capital. What can they do to protect it?
Today, scientists from both organizations are working together at 3 global test sites in the United States, Brazil, and Asia, to implement scientific methods and models that can be used to inform more sustainable business practices at Dow. It will take public and private sector collaborations like this one to make real change happen. Our work together provides an important opportunity to demonstrate the inherent value of nature and to provide a roadmap for other companies to follow.
We have come a long way since our kickoff in January of 2011, with pilot sites underway and significant progress to report. It's required vision and courage from leaders at every level to make real change like this happen. That is the way it should be. Change for the better, with human ingenuity, sound science, and true collaboration leading the way.
I'm excited to introduce our next guest in the studio who have firsthand insight into both of these relationships. Glenn Prickett, the Chief External Affairs Officer at the Nature Conservancy, is here to talk to Mark Weick, Director of Sustainability at Dow, and Matt Arnold, Managing Director and Head of Environmental Affairs at JPMorgan Chase. They're here to share their experiences on and with courageous collaboration.
Well, thank you, and thanks to everyone joining us here in the studio, watching online, in the meetups that are happening around the country and around the world. We're thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be joined here by Mark Weick and Matt Arnold, both old friends and close collaborators. So let's get right into it. We're here at an event around the global goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, as they're officially called. Your companies have been leaders in sustainability in the business world for some time, and I've seen firsthand that you really approach that as a business strategy and a business opportunity. Our viewers may be wondering, how does that align with the global goals? So what is your company's sustainability strategy? How is that connected to the global goals? Mark, why don't we start with you?
Sure, Glenn, thanks for asking. Dow just introduced in April our 2025 sustainability goals. So this is our third decade of 10-year-long sustainability goals, because we as a company want to look forward into the future and think about where the planet needs to be in 10 years and where we need to be to meet the needs of the planet in 10 years. We were able to put together the 2025 goals over a period starting in the fall of 2009. So we were able to follow the development of the Sustainable Development Goals as they were put together, and consciously link our 7 Dow 2025 sustainability goals with the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals in over 40 direct links that were put there really on purpose, very much intentionally, to make sure that we are meeting the needs of a global community with the goals that we're setting out. And so, for example, as we are publicizing within our company our 2025 sustainability goals, we're asking people across the company to take selfies like this, because one of our goals is to value nature, for example. One of our themes in our 2025 goals is to courageously collaborate with people that you might not think we would be collaborating with. And we're also committing to unlocking the potential of people in science. And so if you look on our websites and on our Tumblr site, there's all kinds of selfies with people across the company making their commitments to these goals, which are aligned with the SDGs.
Great, and the work we've done together on your nature goal, I think, is a good example of that, and we'll talk a little bit later about how that supports both corporate initiatives and the broader global goals.
Absolutely.
So Matt, how about JPMorgan? How do you intersect with the global goals?
Well, we intersect quite intricately, but not really on purpose. We started our sustainability journey probably 10 years ago, and initially for a bank, that was a risk management thought. If we, through our financing, underwriting, lending, investing, create consequences on the environment, on vulnerable communities, on indigenous people, how are we adopting stewardship over those outcomes with our clients? So probably 5 years of a risk management journey, which continues to this day. In 2009, we created an impact investing, we call it social finance at JPMorgan, investment program. So if there's a risk management thought, now we have an investment thought. And that is geared towards disadvantaged communities, healthcare access to financial inclusion and financial literacy, access to education for disadvantaged communities. And we had we've had a fair degree of success with that. And so 2 years ago, we launched a client-facing client advisory group, very responsive to client needs. And when you have a client base as broad as ours, you're pulled into almost every kind of social and environmental need that you can imagine. So when we obviously watch the development of the Sustainable Development Goals, and if you look across the 17, we have activity to varying degrees matched up to at least a dozen of them. So we are geared into that, and our activity, we're a bank, so we're organizing capital around those needs. And so we're sort of in the game, but we're not guided by that framework, but we're mindful of it. And I guess our thought is, these are great ideas. The ideas in the Sustainable Development Goals are good ideas, and we feel like our strategy's fueled by good ideas, and so turns out they're the same ideas.
Great, thanks, Matt. And I'll just say, for the Nature Conservancy, the global goals are incredibly valuable. Our mission is to protect the lands and waters on which all life depends. We've been doing that for decades. But more and more, we see that nature is essential if the world is going to solve some big global challenges around water security, food security, climate change. And so we've been rethinking our strategies so that we think about how do we put nature in service of people to solve some of these sustainable development challenges. So the global goals provide a very clear constellation of guiding stars that we can aim our efforts at to support some of these bigger global sustainability challenges. Now, as we saw in the video that opened this, our companies have been working together on this idea of the value of nature, how nature provides critical services to people and economies and to business. And each of your organizations, each of your companies has been collaborating with the Nature Conservancy to figure out how do we really make real that economic value of nature in society. So let's dig into that a little bit. Matt, we'd love to hear from your perspective, what brought JPMorgan Chase to the table with the Nature Conservancy to think about what became NatureVest?
So it was a great journey. As I mentioned, our initial engagement in this agenda broadly 10 years ago was a risk management agenda. And in that one, it's about doing less of something or doing it more carefully. But bankers get excited by doing more of something, doing more business. So if we wanted to be motivated and inspire our people, our bankers and our investors, we needed to be a bank for something, not a bank against something. And so you ask yourself, can you be a bank for nature? And the Nature Conservancy is an old-time collaborator of mine through my career, and so we started this dialogue about could we together create a bank for nature? And it started actually through one deal, as I think a lot of good ideas start through one specific thing. It was a massive property that was going up for sale in the United States that we thought we could buy and manage sustainably. And there was a developer lurking there who was going to clear cut. It was a forested property on an ocean. Who was going to clear cut the property for housing, which we thought would be a sad outcome. So we developed together this team that went after this. We ended up losing. But what we realized is that we had forged this partnership and that the Nature Conservancy needed to have finance-oriented staff, which they didn't have a lot of at the time. And so we were able to provide a grant for them to create this little unit called NatureVest, which we call the little investment bank inside the Nature Conservancy. And we have staffed this full-time with probably 1.5 people. And then we bring in bankers as deals emerge. And our goal is to find $1 billion in quasi-commercial capital, impact capital, to go after conservation outcomes, whether it's in fisheries, forests, freshwater, climate mitigation. And we're about 20% of the way there, and we're working hard at it. And it's a really, really great, beyond our expectations, partnership. I mean, we really feel like when that team, the combined team is together, they're like one unit. So it's really...
Yeah, and we're thrilled with the partnership. You know, when we step back and think about how we're going to accomplish our mission to protect land and water, increasingly at very large scales. So Matt, you were just in the Gulf of Mexico with our team and some other partners, and we're looking at how do we restore the coastline of the entire Gulf of Mexico that's been so hammered by extreme weather and that's so essential for life, you know, human and non-human in that ecosystem. We're never going to raise enough good old-fashioned philanthropic grant money to achieve that goal at scale. And Now there's a lot of government money flowing into that region because of the Gulf oil spill. But combining some public money with some of our traditional philanthropy money with private investment is going to be essential if we're going to restore the wetlands along the Gulf of Mexico, just to take one example of the work TNC does. And that's where an entity like NatureVest and the partnership with JPMorgan Chase can make such a big deal to get the kind of capital we need to do the conservation work that needs to get done.
And you can do this anywhere. I mean, we did a grasslands deal in Kenya. We're looking at water deals in China. So, you know, it's not just the U.S. This is a very global exercise. It's the principle of economics. Is there a cash flow? Is there some economic value in this place that we can figure out a way to monetize and get some creative financial acumen on it?
So this idea of the value of nature comes right into Dow Chemical and your 2025 goals. So Mark, tell us how that originated, and let's talk a little bit about the work we've done together on the nature goal.
Sounds good. The audience just saw a video featuring Andrew Liveris, our CEO and chairman of the board, and he launched our 2015 sustainability goals back in 2006, and then in 2008 came to Neil Hawkins, our chief sustainability officer, and said, Neil, can you tell me what issues maybe we missed in our 2015 sustainability goals that just can't wait until our next generation approach to sustainability? And one of the things we thought about was the intersection of biodiversity and healthy ecosystems on which we all depend, but of course we depend on healthy ecosystems and ecosystem services for a lot of things that are undervalued in the marketplace. I think about clean water flows, I think about fresh air, I think about coastal storm surge protection, I think about pollination in our agricultural businesses, and issues around land use and preserving healthy ecosystems and ecosystem services as we go forward, and valuing those properly in business decisions, not necessarily as they're going to be today, but where they're going to be 5, 10, 20 years from now, because we have to think that long when we think about manufacturing plants and products and services that we're creating to meet global needs. And so in 2008, we suggested that, and then, of course, through some of the collaborations that we've had over decades on local levels with the Nature Conservancy, Neil thought of you as a natural partner and said, okay, in 2010, let's think about how we can do something that is different for both of our organizations. You're thinking about the biodiversity side of this. We're thinking about the ecosystem services side of it. And of course, we both care about the other, but our missions need to align in this common project. And so, kicked off in 2011, we're tremendously proud of the progress that we've made in the last 5 years. And as Glenn, you said, it culminates in this nature goal that we were able to announce in April, where we're committing to valuing nature in our capital allocation decision processes, our new product development processes, our new business development processes, our real estate decision-making processes. And frankly, we're doing this because we think it will not only have social and environmental benefits, but also economic benefits. We're thinking that we'll get $1 billion in net present value by valuing nature differently over the next decade. And it's a tremendously exciting goal for our employees as well as people who are watching this.
Yeah, and we're thrilled with it. You know, there's been a lot of talk and research and great thinking about this idea of nature's value to business, and why shouldn't business be capturing that value on its balance sheets and financial statements. And a lot of it has been just that, kind of high-level thinking. We think this is the first time that a Fortune 500 company has actually taken that idea and really brought it into its day-to-day business decisions. So it's early days, it's a goal right now, and so our commitment is to work together to make that goal a reality over the next decade, to really show the business value to Dow and the value to the communities where you operate that nature provides. So we've been working together, each of us in different ways, and I think a general theme of the conference we've been at here the last few days is that if we're really going to accomplish the global goals, and if business is going to get involved in that effort, it's going to take some unusual collaborations between organizations that in the past haven't worked together all that much. So business working with NGOs, public agencies working with the private sector. So the theme of this session is courageous collaboration, and I think that's what our organizations in our humble ways have been involved in over the last few years. So let's talk with each other and share with the audience some of the things we've learned about collaborating kind of outside your comfort zone. It hasn't been easy. I think it's been very rewarding. we've probably all kind of encountered some surprising challenges along the way and some surprising real rewards. So Matt, why don't you share with us how it's looked from your perspective?
So our sustainable finance team sits within the umbrella of corporate responsibility, which is a much broader thing that includes workforce issues, and includes community development issues, and includes volunteerism. And we collaborate with NGOs across that entire span. So although my experience is here principally, we collaborate with Pyxera on our volunteer initiatives. And my colleague Tara Cardone in the audience is our global head of volunteerism. And so we have one going there. We collaborate with the Brookings Institution on cities. With the Nature Conservancy and viscerally, the experience has revealed a couple of things. One, we don't trust each other at first. We have bankers, they have scientists. We have people who focus on money, they have people who focus on nature. And they think we're greedy and we think they're vague. So it's an interesting thing because, in the first get-go, one of the folks on the TNC side, the Nature Conservancy side, had never met a banker before. So this guy's walking in there with stereotypes about what a banker is. And it turns out they're completely wrong. But he didn't know that. And of course, ours were completely wrong. And it turns out they have deal makers and we have passionate environmentalists. And so, but it took a while. It took 6 months and some kind of sloppy work to discover that. So that's really one, is expect some missteps. And be mindful that the assumptions you are making are probably not shared by the folks on the other side of the table. The second one is to keep at it. Make it the only one. We started thinking, oh, we'll collaborate with these guys and these and these and these and those people over there. And if you don't really invest from your own organization, it's going to fail. And so we are all in on the Nature Conservancy. And people bring us new ideas for partnerships all the time, but we continue. And so we had an opportunity in China. Let's open a sustainability idea in China. Let's do it with the Nature Conservancy. Let's do it in Europe. Let's do it with the Nature Conservancy. So that one is a really big one. So I would say, really, I'll just stop there and let Mark jump in. But you will not trust one another at first, and stay in it and make it a big part of your work plan.
Great. Mark?
And one of the reasons we wanted to have a 5, now 6-year collaboration was for some of the things that Matt just said, just getting over some of the even language barriers that we had at first, where we're talking about ecosystem services and the scientists of the Nature Conservancy are talking about biodiversity, and we have to find the sweet spots where we can speak each other's language. But it's been tremendously rewarding, and I wouldn't trade the collaboration for anything. We've learned so much from our colleagues at the Nature Conservancy, not only in the technical details of how to value water in our largest plant in Texas, or how to think about reforestation as a way that can be an economically viable option for air quality control, but also in the way that we think differently about business problems. And I think that's the biggest value in the collaboration that we've seen so far, is that it's helped us to think differently and think better.
That's great. And I'll say from our side, everything you just said rings true the other way from our side as well. And I guess one thing I would add, and I think each of us has experienced this, we work in big organizations. Now, the Nature Conservancy isn't as big as either of your companies, but in the nonprofit world, we're fairly large, a lot of people around the world with a lot of different ideas. And so a big part of collaboration is not just with the entity on the other side of the table, but with your colleagues on your side of the table. And how do you get the different parts of your own organization to really understand the value of collaboration and get past some of those stereotypes and mistrust? So I think one lesson I've learned is that there's a lot of internal change management and collaboration that you need to do if one of these partnerships is going to be successful, in addition to learning to work with the other organization. And I think for me, the most important lesson I've learned from both of our collaborations, and I think we've done this well, whether we knew what we were doing at the beginning or not, I don't know, but it's worked out well, is to, at the very outset, think big and be really clear about the big impact you're trying to accomplish. Because it's easy to go into a new partnership to say, oh, let's put our toe in the water, let's just try a project and see if it works. But you'll end up going through the same strains and stresses for a small project as you will for a big outcome. And I think in both of our cases, we said, let's think big. So with JPMorgan, it was let's bring at least $1 billion of impact capital into conservation. With Dow, it was let's incorporate the value of nature into all of Dow's business decisions throughout the whole company. And that seemed a little crazy at the beginning, I think, to some of us and maybe some of our colleagues. But now it's actually happening, and it makes all those strains and struggles worth it. And really, it's why we're doing this in the first place.
Right.
If we just wanted to do another project, we really wouldn't need each other. But if we're really going to change things and achieve these global goals, then we got to work out of our comfort zones.
Absolutely.
So we've got, go ahead, Mark.
Well, I was going to say, this is really all about redefining the role of business in society. If you look at what Matt's trying to do at JPMorgan Chase and what we're trying to do at Dow and what you're trying to do as well, it's redefining the roles that various people have been stereotyped into playing. There's a perception of what happens at JPMorgan Chase with bankers, and a perception of what happens at Dow, and a perception of what happens at the Nature Conservancy. To get at the awesome issues that we're trying to deal with in the Sustainable Development Goals, we're all going to have to think differently about our roles and collaborate courageously across academia, across NGOs, across governments, across industry.
Good. Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. We need to think differently. We need to get outside our comfort zones, and ultimately we need to achieve these global goals, and that's going to require some new ways of working. And we're thrilled to be doing that with each of your organizations, and I'm thrilled to have both of you as partners. So
Yeah,
thanks for being here.
Same for us.
Thanks.
Courageous collaboration. Collaborating outside our comfort zone, what does it take? It takes trust, expecting and accepting missteps, and perseverance. Let's give another round of applause to Matt, Glenn, and Mark for that great presentation. I couldn't help but think that there was a joke in there somewhere, like a banker, a scientist, and a tree hugger go into a bar, and what happens? It was something special about that panel, a chemical company, a bank, and the Nature Conservancy. But valuing nature, investing in nature, and putting a price tag on nature, very important. And the Nature Conservancy and Dow and JPMorgan working together to really value natural capital. Well, you know that expression, one man's trash is another man's treasure? Well, up next, I'm excited to introduce our second social entrepreneur, Scott Boylston, whose organization, Emergent Structures, helps communities convert waste into wealth and natural resources for the community. Scott, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Scott Boylston, and I'm a professor of design for sustainability at Savannah College of Art and Design, and also the president of Emergent Structures. Emergent Structures is a nonprofit organization that leverages abundant and available materials to build sustainable, equitable, and resilient communities. I'm from Savannah. Savannah has amazing resources, beautiful resources that the city has historically built its economy on. If you take a look at some of these visuals, this is what Savannah is like. However, when I talk about resources for building community, I'm not talking about any resources that you see here. I'm talking about resources that are available in Savannah as well as in northern China and India and everywhere. And what I'm talking about is construction and demolition waste. There's so much construction and demolition waste every single year flowing through our cities and out into landfills. To give you a sense of what I mean by that, the Netherlands has almost a million tons of construction and demolition waste being landfilled every year. That's despite the Netherlands diverting 90% of their construction and demolition waste. So only with 10%, they're still producing 1 million tons of construction and demolition waste. Hong Kong, a city that's half the size of the Netherlands in terms of population, is producing almost 3 million tons of waste every single year from C&D. And the United States landfills a whopping 134 million tons of construction waste every single year. Our organization is looking at how every city, every community can turn that waste into wealth. If I only had a minute on the stage to tell you what we do, I would tell you this. We take things like this and we turn them into things like this. We take things like this and we turn them into things like this. Things like this are turned into things like this. And things like this are turned into things like this. And this is how we do it. We've a lot of talk about tri-sector partnerships, engaging community at the grassroots level. We bring together people from engineering and construction, municipalities. We bring community leaders together. We bring wealthy populations together with poorer populations to volunteer to do some of this work. We pay carpenter apprentice programs and individuals who are learning a new trade to work side by side with community members. And it's in a collaborative, it's an iterative process. What we've decided to do in Savannah, it's 6 years old now, this endeavor, is to prototype this concept, to find out if indeed it could work in larger cities around the world. And through these processes, these cross-sector iterative processes, we found that perhaps there is a way to take these materials effectively and turn them into community wealth. So very quickly, I'm going to talk about we've developed a three-tier model, and this three-tier model is intended to ignite interest and in this kind of work across sectors. The first area is a market transformation. We, in 2009, were invited into a redevelopment project in Savannah, 200 1943 homes that were built to house shipbuilders during the war effort, had become a blighted neighborhood, high drug, high crime, and they were looking to bulldoze it. I asked if we could actually try something different, and they were willing to give it a try. So what we did is, over the course of 4 years, worked with the construction companies, the city of Savannah, Mercy Housing, which is a large nonprofit that provides affordable housing. And we took materials from these buildings, and as you see in some of these pictures, created a new space directly on site within that redevelopment, so that these people who are living in some of the buildings that you just saw, when they come into the new community center or their new library, they're actually walking on materials that were a part of their history. So symbolically, these kinds of materials speak to the legacy of living in this space and the transformation that they've undergone. Another part of this, however, is making sure that the construction industry is a willing partner. How do we make it meaningful to an industry that's very complex, that has a lot of competition between various different businesses? Redevelopment's a complex process. I want to show you this picture. Brian Quigley is on the left there. He's a north-south contractor, a general contractor. This was his idea. We stimulated ideas. We're not doing everything. We're facilitating conversations. Everybody knows you can't take an 8-foot-long stud and put it into a new building as a stud. Everybody knows that. But that's where the innovation ends, is saying, well, we can't do that. Instead, what Brian started thinking about is if we take an 8-foot stud and cut it down into 18-inch sections, and then work with a truss manufacturer to incorporate those pieces into new trusses, we might be able to start doing some innovation within this on-site reuse. A gentleman on the right was I think this is a perfect individual we're aiming a lot of our work at. The electrical general contractor, when we were walking out to the site, Brian Quigley and myself were telling him about what we had done, and he was about as skeptical as anybody could be. He said, that's ridiculous, it's not going to work, or it's too symbolic, you can't do a lot of things. He took one look up at what was about 3,000 of these pieces in these new trusses, and he quite literally changed his mind on the spot. He saw his eyes open. He said, wow, if you can do that, well, you can do this, and you can do this, and you can do this. So what we're trying to do is demonstrate these new ideas in action so that people can actually see a new future in front of them. Other things that we do is work directly with the community. In this case, we're using the studs to teach that community to build their own rainwater catchment stands, and we ran workshops with these waste materials. This entire model is focused on trying to figure out how to create more efficiencies in the system. So what you see here is a 3D model that we generated so that we could actually use these buildings as a form of a shopping cart. And we think that if we're in the early stages of developing an ERP that's specific to construction and demolition waste that we think could transform businesses at a high level. So identifying the materials, and then once again, looking at them as if they were something in a shopping cart. The second level is how we introduce more partnerships. We've worked with public schools, we've worked with the Habitat for Humanity, and we're developing programs so that, that local craftsmen can build furniture from these materials. We've also developed public school lesson plans to generate an interest and innovation within children based upon this idea that, that these materials can be something other than what we see them as they are right now. And then the habitat, you can see I'm wearing a bow tie here. Well, this bow tie was once a stud. It's a wooden stud, 1943. This piece is from a piece of wood, 1943, developing innovative ways for people to go, wow, if that's possible, then ... and let them fill in the gaps and generate more creativity at the local level. So the final one, and this is also kind of an example of cultural paradigm shift, because if someone sees a bow tie and says, I didn't know you could make that out of wood, we want people thinking very differently. Another thing that we're doing is we're working with the donor class, and we're trying to create a more meaningful form of philanthropy. We call it materialanthropy because it's not donating money, it's donating materials, but it's much deeper than something that you'd find at Habitat Restore, because what we do, this is the Caldwells in Savannah, we engage them in the projects that are created from the material waste streams that are coming from their individual homes. This is a map, it's geographically rendered. The bigger the red dot is, the more materials that went into the project. And for every large-scale project, they are invited to the ribbon cutting, whether it be a public school or a community center that has a new shed or a new pergola or something like that, and they become invested in the process. This would be one example of how we worked with 2 materialanthropists on top, and the city of Savannah, which is the third image, and then IKEA. We were working with a number of international organizations to fund some of these projects in meaningful ways. And what you see on the right-hand side is a plaque that tells a story of the materials. So anybody who goes onto that pergola knows where the flooring came from. They have a sense of the history of the materials. So very quickly, this is our 3-tier model. I gave you some examples of each of the things that we're doing in there. We have prototyped many, many different kinds of projects within each of these areas, and we think that we can provide this as a consulting tool to municipalities where they can pick their own menu items off of this to provide flexibility. 230,000 public housing units in the United States alone coming down. This is a HUD number in the next 5 years. I'm sorry, next 10 years. It's a lot of material. We know we can't save it all. We know that. But there has to be a better way, a more efficient way, a way that generates new value and new connectivity in communities and between businesses. This is our philosophy is built on Wendell Berry's idea of solving for pattern. Too often humans create solutions that ripple negatively throughout the system. We're very conscious about exploring how solutions ripple positively, generate more positive outcomes just for actually creating that. Very quickly at the end here, we're inspired by the SDGs, and we have been mapping. This is not a checklist, but this is very much helpful for us. We know that a lot of our work fits into number 11. We also know that a lot of our work fits into some of the other categories. But more importantly for us is the outer ring, because the work that we do are for people who are creating food justice programs. They're creating educational programs for at-risk youth. And we know that these materials can become a resource to build community. And this is our philosophy. It's not a board. It's a springboard for sustainable change. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Fascinating. Waste to wealth. It's a fantastic presentation. What a great opening segment that we've had. We heard from Kathy Kelvin, who talked about making the goals personal. Don't be a bystander. Individual to collective action is what Sheryl WuDunn talked to us about. And Shabita, the cricket granola. Let's really rethink how we think about what we think about protein. Grasshoppers of today being the sushi of tomorrow. Fascinating. These tri-sector partnerships, creative collaboration between the Nature Conservancy, JPMorgan Chase, Dow Chemical Company. we've learned that these goals are attainable, achievable, and that coming together in collaboration, we can really, really make a difference at the individual, community, country, and global level. I hope all of you watching with others at meetups, at your desk, at home, have been joining the conversation online. Well, next up, we're looking forward to welcoming Mark Kramer, the father of shared value, and Stan Litow, who I would call the father of corporate citizenship, in conversation with Deirdre White. Send us your questions. We're looking forward to hearing and sharing your thoughts and views on the guests we've just heard from, and those coming up. But first, we're going to take a short break. And during that break, check out an example of an innovative partnership changing the lives of farmers in rural Rajasthan, India. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Communities in rural Rajasthan, and the Jiva communities in particular, face the challenge of subsistence farming, challenges around their access to proper nutrition, but it also trickles down to whether there are opportunities for education, what the sanitation and safety and security in their neighborhoods are. These are systemic problems. You can't just say, oh, we have an agriculture challenge in this community. In fact, all of these issues are very much intertwined.
We realized there was so much more we could do than just volunteer to come here and do manual work. I think we left feeling good about being there, but feeling like we underserved because there was so much more we could do, and we wanted to come back and work on it.
John Deere came to us inspired to do something more. So we went in and we did a needs assessment to find out what the needs were from the community themselves and the prioritization of those needs. You need to be able to track a lot of different indicators to see how you're progressing, what are the impacts, and to be able to adjust the strategy along the way and make sure that your approach is contextualized and makes sense for the community. At times, there were things that we thought were big challenges, but they ended up being, fourth or fifth on the list for the villagers. And so that was really important for us in the design phase.
What has been different about the Jiva program and what is different about the Pyxera global approach is that we really tried to understand not just the symptoms of the problem, but where the problem comes from at a deeper level.
What makes Jiva unique to us is that we actually led the project with a volunteer project, led by our CEO, Sam Allen. We've used Deere's core competencies and expertise to really make a sustainable impact and to really bring some value to the villages. And we've complemented every activity along the way with volunteer activities.
In agriculture and income security, we are doing demonstration plot trainings, crop diversification, and related activities like drip irrigation, net houses, exposure visits, and capacity building of the farmers there. In education, we are working with all the stakeholders to improve the quality of education. Presently, we have 2 after-school coaching centers in each of the 3 villages where 462 children are coming daily. In infrastructure, we are trying to improve the school campus and also trying to develop infrastructure that aids the improvement in agriculture and economic activities.
I believe Jiva is well positioned to enable the sustainability of our work through its rigorous participatory approach. Not only do we engage the villagers in the development of our solutions or our projects, but we find ways to incorporate them in the execution of these projects and ultimately in their ownership.
Another thing that's unusual about this project is that these other communities are coming of their own volition to learn about it because they see that things are changing and they want this for their own community. That's exactly what we want when we're doing this kind of work. And I think that we've learned a lot of lessons that could be implemented in many other communities around the world.
I hope you're working on your questions and comments for Mark Kramer and Stan Litow and the other great speakers we have joining us in the following segments. We're really excited that more than 20 different organizations are hosting meetups around the world to engage directly with the leaders we have here with us today. We want to give a full shout out to all those organizations that have signed up to be part of this amazing event. Let's start with those closest to home here in Washington, D.C. We've got students at Georgetown University's MS in Foreign Service Program and American University's Net Impact Chapter and International Communications Program, and Stone Ridge School of the Sacred Heart right here in DC. Down the road, students at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. Further north, up the East Coast, we've got B-Peace in New York, MIT Ideas Global Challenge in Boston, Rutgers University and the Sustainable MBA program at the University of Vermont's Grossman School of Business in Burlington. On the West Coast, we've got 3 organizations hosting meetups all the way in California. Good morning, California. No problem if you're joining with your PJs on. Thanks for getting up early and joining us. We've got Asylum Access hosting a meetup in Oakland, Oaktown, and we have Barang Communications and Global Engagement Partners in San Francisco. Good morning, San Fran. We've got a great cohort of schools and organizations joining us in the American Midwest. We've got 2 universities and 2 high schools representing today with us in Michigan. Alma College Model UN and the Alma College Public Affairs Institute in Alma, Michigan. Northwood University in Midland, Michigan, and Traverse City West Senior High School in Traverse City, along with Potowski High School. Thanks to all of you for joining in with all of us. Global Ties US local chapters all around the United States are hosting meetups today. NASFA, the Association of International Educators, has local affiliates across the United States and around the world who are tuning in as well. And the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs alumni are also joining us. As I mentioned earlier, we're so excited that colleagues across Africa are hosting meetups as well. Dreamcatcher Foundation, South Africa. Nigeria's Cross River University of Technology in Calabar. College of Basic and Applied Sciences at the University of Ghana in Accra. The Association of Ghanaian Industries are all engaged, and Partners for Development are hosting meetups in Nigeria, Tanzania, Benin, and Cambodia. Thanks for being here. Don't forget to join the conversation on Twitter. We want to see your pictures of the meetups in action, pajamas or no pajamas. Global Ties US local chapters around the world are also with us. Thanks to, as I mentioned earlier, excuse me one second. Now let me introduce our panel. We have Deirdre White, Global CEO of Pyxera Global. We have Stan Litow of IBM, and the famous Mark Kramer, Mr. Shared Value. Welcome.
Thank you, CD. Well, I'm so pleased to have you gentlemen here for a number of reasons. But this particular panel, we are talking about pioneering. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about pioneering is because it's so important in this space. It's important to get more organizations, more companies to come along on this journey. And you too have been real pioneers. The Shared Value Initiative, in terms of actually creating a mindset among companies that they can deliver social good while still making a profit. And Stan, what IBM has done in terms of creating models for good corporate engagement that so many other companies have been able to follow. This year represents our 25th anniversary at Pyxera Global, and Mark and Stan are two of the recipients of our Pioneers in Purposeful Global Engagement Award. So it's great to have you be able to share some of your thoughts today about why you are pioneers, why you cared to be pioneers, and what it means to be a pioneer. And I'll start with you, Mark.
Well, thanks. Well, you know, I'm not sure I ever expected to be a pioneer or even necessarily think of myself that way. But it's really been about pursuing a question. And the question is, how do you achieve social change and social impact? And pursuing that question has led me from a background in venture capital into philanthropy, and then beyond philanthropy into working with corporations, this idea of shared value, working across sectors with our idea of collective impact, and really trying to figure out what's holding the world back and where are the levers that really can help make change at scale that's so badly needed.
Why are you a pioneer, Stan?
I don't know about the pioneer part of it, but I think that from corporation standpoint, it is good business to focus in on your business strategy and societal impact in a shared way, to produce real value for the company. And you can't do that if you ignore the importance of the role that business plays in society. Now, this isn't something new for a large company. If you think about it, in the 1930s, IBM worked with the government and created Social Security. There was a piece of legislation. It couldn't have been implemented by the government. A company working with the government implemented a path-breaking piece of legislation that had real value for the company, and it came as a result of a public-private partnership, or when IBM helped create the issue of computer science, which didn't exist until 1946. Actually, the CEO of the IBM company named it computer science. So now what we really need is a 21st century version of that, where people really understand the value, the real value to your employees, the real value to your shareholders, the real value to your company. And you can't do that operating alone. No one company can do something really significant in improving education or making an impact on the environment or addressing the challenge of healthcare. It has to involve cross-sector activity.
Well, no one company can do it alone. This is one of the reasons we consider IBM to be a pioneer, is because you have worked in such close collaboration with many other companies, including some of your competitors, in developing these models and in rolling them out so that you could have a greater impact. Why would you do that? Why not just own it and be the champion of it at IBM?
Well, look, I mean, from a branding standpoint, there are certain things that you will want to own. You know, we'll use the Watson technology and improve cancer diagnostics and treatment. And that will be something that IBM will do. Significant, important. On the other hand, coming up with ways to engage your employees to make an impact on society through the Corporate Service Corps, where we've had 3,000 of our employees on 1,000 teams around the world. That's something we definitely want to invite other companies in. We want to create a model so that they can engage in it. Basically adding our value to our clients, which is critically important. Why work with IBM? Because we add so much value to the relationship between IBM and our clients. But secondly, you really want to change society's view of companies. And you can't do that on your own. Actually, you don't want to have outliers. You want to get large numbers of companies behaving in a way that makes an impact on society, because that's good for your sector and it's good for all companies. So when we engage other companies, for example, in our PTech program, to build the skills of the next generation of workers and address U.S. competitiveness, that's something that IBM can lead on, but we need collaborators and partners. And the benefit is to IBM, but the benefit is more broadly to society.
Mark, how is that perception of business's role in society changing? And what do you see through the Shared Value Initiative? Is it real change?
I think there's absolutely real change, and we see it by leading companies all around the world. You know, the Shared Value Initiative really has thousands of members spread all over the world and is beginning to create nuclei of independent action around shared value in different parts of the world, where local companies are coming together and saying, how does this issue apply, this idea apply to the issues in our country and to the situation in our country? And that's very, very powerful, because the idea is a great umbrella, but to make it real, it has to be about a specific business and a specific issue in a specific geography. And that's what we're seeing happen in so many different industries in so many different places. So it's very exciting. But I will say it is also a real change in the mindset for business. The idea that we can make money working with low-income populations, and that that's okay, it doesn't have to be charity. The idea that we can rethink our products, we can rethink our value chain, to take into account social issues, really build it into our strategy. It doesn't have to be the CSR and foundation people off to the side. These are real shifts in how companies operate. You know, we're seeing companies create new positions of vice president of shared value or of social innovation, because they didn't have a role that was both operational and involved social issues before. And so it's a real shift. It will take time.
It's a real shift. It will take time. And one of the things we talked about earlier today is there are not enough companies that are going this shared value route. And I have a specific question from Twitter from Asia Menson at GSK. And her question is, how do we get more business and civil society involved in multi-sectoral partnership to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals so that it's not the same people at the table?
Well, I think you have to socialize the impact. I think that a lot of people thought about corporate philanthropy as something that was about generosity, and that it was important for a company to be generous and to do something. They even had phrases like giving back, and that's a good thing to do, but it doesn't focus in on the impact or the value. I think having clear metrics, so when you do path-breaking activity in this area, has it helped you significantly improve the skills of your workforce? Has it helped you retain top talent in your company? Has it helped you attract socially responsible investors to invest in what you're doing? Has it helped you open new markets? Has it helped you improve your relationship with clients? Has the collaboration and partnership with government or not-for-profits helped solve a problem that impacts on your company bottom line? Companies are very good at measuring a whole host of things. They haven't been as good at measuring the clear value of your corporate citizenship program. We do that year to year. We present it to our board of directors so that they can actually see, according to 5 different metrics, what are the actual benefits, and that gives them confidence that this is something that, regardless of your ups and downs from a corporate profit standpoint, this is something that is as valuable as making your investment in research or making your investment in skills building for your employees. It's critically important. It has metrics. And when other companies take a look at that, they begin to see, well, this could be viewed in a different way. At the Harvard Business School, one of the professors there, Rosabeth Cantor, described the IBM approach as going from spare change to real change. Real change is something that you measure, and then you have confidence that if you make these investments and doing things in a different way, you have actual results.
Now, Mark, you've worked with a lot of different companies on their shared value programs, and you've looked at this issue of measurement. Can you give us some specific examples of how companies have measured the value back to the company and how they've used that information to further their work?
Sure, and it's not just measuring the social impact, but it's understanding the link between the social impact and the business benefit. How does what you're achieving in terms of social impact drive benefits for the company that in turn justify investing more resources and efforts in achieving greater social impact? And so that link is often missing. We've had a working group of a fascinating cross-section of companies that have tried to focus on how do you measure health outcomes and improvement. And it's the obvious people like pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies, but it's also Verizon, who sees that using mobile technology is increasingly important in healthcare. It is software companies. It is a whole host of companies that see new business opportunities in solving health problems. And I completely agree with Stan that to work across sectors, you have to have a common set of metrics. You have to be measuring the same things toward the same goals. And I think what really motivates people to work across these sectors is when they realize it enables them to reach their own goals. We have another working group at the Shared Value Initiative, which is the heads of 15 of the largest international NGOs in the world. And they are meeting regularly to figure out what are the shared value projects that we can do with companies that are profit-making, because we see that that will enable us to scale our impact and serve our mission. And so it's recognizing that whether you're a nonprofit, whether you're a company, whether you're in government policy, you have to work across these sectors if you're going to achieve your goals.
But working across those sectors is also really, really challenging. It's hard to forge a real partnership. What are some of the challenges in partnership?
Well, first of all, you can't change anything unless you deeply understand it. If you want to make an impact on education and you don't understand how it's structured, you don't understand the critical policy issues, governance issues, finance issues, you will not be successful. If you're trying to make a collaboration and partnership with a non-governmental entity, you have to understand how they operate, what motivates them, and they have to understand you. For me, it helps that I was the Deputy Chancellor of Schools in New York. It helped that I worked for a mayor or a governor. It helped that I ran a not-for-profit organization. But for a lot of people, working cross-sector involves a real learning curve. You can't be successful with a collaborator and partner unless you understand what motivates them, the critical organizational issues, and a collaboration and partnership needs to be equal. You can't just say, because we're giving you money, we want you to do the following kinds of things, and we're not going to share that work with you. When we came up with the idea of transforming high school in America and hopefully around the world, and thinking about how you could change the curriculum to include workplace skills, how you could bring higher education and K-12 together in an innovative and creative way involving with businesses so you could get at the skills crisis, that involved a deep collaboration. We needed to get other companies involved. We needed government support at the highest level, President of the United States, governors, mayors, school district leaders, university presidents. That's very complicated. But it's actually no more complicated than a lot of difficult things that companies do. They do it all the time. But they have to apply the same skill to this kind of work. I think if you think that it's easy, maybe writing a check is easy. Bringing about real significant change involves a real commitment to understand and knowledge about the cross-sector. And then identifying what does success look like at the end of a 3-month period, a 6-month period, or a 9-month period. Don't wait for the end to determine whether or not you've got results, and don't wait for the end to find out whether or not the thing that you're trying to do is actually scalable or sustainable. There have been a lot of examples of people who have done one great school somewhere, and then it never goes to scale. And why is that? Because the scale-up strategy should have been part of the initiation strategy. So all of these things are things that businesses do in their day-to-day work about building their company. They have to apply the same kind of determined knowledge to the kinds of things that we're talking about in terms of cross-sector. And from the standpoint of government and not-for-profits, you have to see business as a real partner, not somebody with a deep pocket, not somebody who doesn't know anything about the issues that you're involved with. you've got to be able to do the same kind of understanding about how to motivate cross-sector. And that's how you get the real benefit. That's how you get the triple value.
And I think what's really implicit in what you've described, which I agree with completely, is the leadership role that companies can play. They can get out in front and they can bring together these consortiums. And the President of the United States will listen to IBM.
Right.
And so will governors. And so will nonprofits all over the world. They can't control the initiative completely. They can't own it completely, but they can bring the right parties together in a way that government has a very hard time doing, and nonprofits often don't have the influence and leverage to do. And so it isn't always that companies have the answer or need to be in charge, but companies can get the ball rolling by taking a leadership role.
One of the things that's always interesting to me about shared value is this idea that there's some very good companies doing very good work, calling it shared value with their left hand, and with their right hand, they may have some pretty abhorrent business practices. How do you square that circle?
Well, you know, the world is changing, and there are a lot of industries that are in real transition, whether it is energy production, whether it is food and beverage, and so on. And these industries, you know, unfortunately, just like the record industry a couple decades ago, have a very profitable business model and very demanding shareholders. And it's very hard for them to let go of what they're currently doing, even if they know that's not the future, to shift over to something where there is a learning curve and there is not the same level of profitability at the outset, and there's a higher degree of risk because it's a new product and a new market that they don't understand as well. And so I think we see a lot of companies that struggle in transition. And again, part of it is the leadership. It takes a leader with a very strong vision to help a company make that move. And part of it, unfortunately, is not going too fast so that you leave your shareholders behind, or rather they kick you out, which is the more likely outcome. So it is managing that process. And I have to say, one of the differences that the Shared Value Initiative, I think, has in perspective from a lot of the older business and society organizations is we're not looking to say, is business good or evil? Is this a good company or a bad company? We're looking to say this company has a set of resources that can be very powerful for social change, and there are a set of social issues that matter to the success of that business. And what we want to do is unleash the power of that company to find business opportunities in solving social problems. And yes, every major company has something they're doing wrong somewhere in the world, I'm quite sure.
Except for IBM.
Except IBM.
Well, I would argue that the things that you're doing wrong are not in the business interest of the company, that they may appear to be in the interest in the short term. Right. So take an example of, you know, IBM opened the first integrated manufacturing plant in the United States below the Mason-Dixon line. At that point, companies were segregated. They thought that was in their interest. That's what government wanted. That's what they did. IBM broke that by opening up what became Lexmark Computers in Lexington, Kentucky, the first integrated manufacturing plant, before there was a Civil Rights Act. Integrated the schools in Lexington, Kentucky. That was a risky move on the part of a business. On the other hand, it paid benefits to the company from an economic standpoint, being able to demonstrate its values, and there were a whole host of activities that took place that actually benefited IBM as a result of that, in terms of a variety of different benefits for your employees. They might look like cost in the short term, but in the long term, they produce value. In the environmental space, they look like they're costly in the short term, they actually produce economic value over the long term. So I think this idea that somehow bad business behavior is something that's good for your bottom line, and this social responsibility or corporate citizenship is something different, then it's only marginally beneficial to the bottom line. I would blow that completely away, and we've got actual practices and clear examples that that kind of leadership is good for your employees, it's good for your shareholders, it actually helps attract the best talent to work in your company. There are a lot of young people who are the most gifted, the most talented, you want to recruit them. They don't want to work for a company that doesn't pay attention to the kind of things that we're talking about. So I really think it's not an either-or situation. It's how you approach it, whether it's short-term or longer-term. When you make investments in research, they don't necessarily produce their benefit in a 30-day period. Everybody understands that. That's what this is about.
Well, thank you both for being here. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for bringing so many companies along on this journey. And it will be a slow journey, but we'll be on it together. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Deirdre.
Thanks again to Stan, Mark, and Deirdre for a fascinating conversation. I want to make an announcement, folks. I have my new dream job title, VP for Shared Value. I love that shift going from spare change to real change. This is what we're talking about, folks. Spare change to real change. Business as a real partner where we measure value, we share value, and we really look for this triple value opportunities. I hope you're anticipating our next couple of conversations. Send us your questions for our last two segments on funding the challenge and activating youth. We'll be sure our guests answer them during their segment. Well, next up, we've got our last entrepreneur who's changing the way we think about diagnosing disease. John Lewandowski is the founder of Disease Diagnostic Group and the winner of the MIT Ideas Global Challenge. He's here to talk today about an innovation that could eliminate the world's deadliest disease. The coolest part, well, cool for some, is that it's pure physics. John?
What if I told you I could save 1 million lives every year with just refrigerator magnets and a laser pointer? My company is Disease Diagnostic Group. My name is John Lewandowski, and my flagship product is the rapid assessment of malaria. Now, I'm a mechanical engineering student at MIT, so I'm more used to looking at stuff like this, not like this. And ultimately, I got started on this through my senior design project at Case Western Reserve University. And the interesting thing there was I was mainly focused on mosquito bed nets. And the problem with mosquito bed nets is that actually they do such a good job keeping out mosquitoes that they're so small, they don't let enough airflow through into the person's ecosystem. And so the issue here is they're not actually cool enough to be able to be used on a daily basis, and then end up being used more as fishing nets rather than bed nets. This got me interested in using a lot of the advice back from the community partners and the local governments, and told me that actually the biggest problem is diagnosis. And the key thing they told me about this is that the mosquito is the deadliest creature on the face of the earth. And I said, how could this be possible, considering it's so small? Well, it boils down to the idea that we meet Emmanuel. And Emmanuel is a 5-year-old child from Tanzania, and he lives in about a 1,000-person village. He thinks he got bit by that very same mosquito just this morning, so he walks with his entire family 2 miles to the nearest clinic. And at that clinic, the clinician puts his blood under a microscope and looks for the infection. And well, can you see the infection? Actually, neither could he, because Emmanuel had a low-level infection that will eventually spread and potentially kill him by being a cerebral malaria. But in addition, he'll walk all the way back to his village, 2 miles, continue to get bit by mosquitoes, and transmit that infection to other people. And that's why malaria is a $12 billion problem. It's because half the world's population is affected by it. There are 500 million infections worldwide, and ultimately 1 million deaths. And so my company is mainly focused on diagnosing that asymptomatic infection, being able to look for the disease when the treatment is nearly 100% effective, and also when it's much more inexpensive to give to the patient. And ultimately, the biggest problem is that only 1 out of every 8 malaria infections are diagnosed correctly. So that's where my device comes in. It's called the Rapid Assessment of Malaria. It's a reusable device that offers a portable enough to be able to take in to the clinic for the person to use, or sit at the pharmacy where someone with a non-specific fever can come in and get tested, and also be paired with a single-use cuvette that holds the blood, and a database that allows you to store data for epidemiology purposes or for procurement. And ultimately what's going on inside the cell, I mentioned magnets. So the parasite comes into the red blood cell, starts digesting the hemoglobin, but it can't finish it, and so it polymerizes this into a larger iron crystal that looks like this. And so for an engineering student, that's music to our ears because these particles are rod-like, they have interesting magnetic and optical properties, and we can do some very cool things with that. One of which is shining a laser through a blood sample that holds these particles, and also holding a magnet next to them. What we're looking for is these particles to clump up and organize in orderly form, and the amount of light reaching the other side tells us not only if you have an infection, but how large that infection is. And so here's ultimately what we're looking for, what's going on in the sample. So we have our hemozone that's scattered around the blood sample. We start pulsing it with a magnetic field, and these particles are rotating around. And based on the amount of light, the white space that gets through the other side, we can determine if that oscillating signal is there and if we have that infection. And ultimately, what is nice about this is it's very simple to use. The person doesn't need any clinical experience whatsoever. In addition, they don't even need refrigeration. So you just take a drop of blood, put it in the cuvette, and 10 to 15 seconds later, you get a result, a quantitative score for how large the parasite load is. And I mentioned it's so easy to use that we can imagine this going through similar distribution channels as mosquito bed nets now, other treatment, or being put in schools where there's a lot of infected children already there that don't have access to diagnostics on a regular basis. But ultimately, the goal for the company is this merger between a low-cost test and a low limit of detection. And that's really what's going to dominate diagnostics for the next decade, showing that we're a company that's on the forefront of this diagnostic path. But what's really interesting is how we got to the point where we are now. So being an engineering student, I was able to go into the lab with really no funding and build the prototypes. So I 3D printed the housings, designed the circuit boards on software, and ordered components to be able to assemble it in a machine shop that is really available in any campus or local community. And actually, if you look inside the normal device, it's pretty interesting because the components are nothing more than you'd find off of Amazon or eBay. It's only when they come together that they form such an interesting solution to this global problem. And what's interesting also is how I got to the financial support for my company. So on the pathway, I told you that I didn't have any funding to begin with. And what's very key is actually the MIT Ideas Global Challenge gave me the ability to write a proposal with this device in mind that would allow me to engage with clinical partners in Peru and India, take my prototypes there, deploy them, and then get feedback that would allow me to generate a better business model, a better company, and ultimately go for these larger organizations that could provide not only more funding, but just a larger community. And so MIT Ideas was really the platform or stepping stone for a lot of what I've raised today, which is over $1 million for this company, entirely non-dilutive funding. And I'm happy to announce my impact, and I'm sure my community members will be happy that we've already established over 2,000 tests in the field with our devices on 5 different continents and 9 different countries. And next year, we hope to do over 5,000 tests, deploying this even farther out with more professional devices on 6 continents and over 20 different countries. And we've also been able to get enough publicity through talks like these that we've been able to have IDEO do an industrial engineering redesign of our device to make it more professional looking, and also an engineering firm to be able to go inside of it and make it more robust from an engineering standpoint. But overall, I mentioned that the goal of the company is actually to build this out to a multiplex platform. So being able to not just detect malaria, which is our first disease, but if you're traveling back even from this presentation, being able to test in the airport if you have dengue fever, tuberculosis, malaria, or another disease. And so that screening ability is something that we're very focused on for the company. But overall, my call to action to you is really the interdisciplinary approach to this. So going across campus, across the department, engaging these conversations with engineers, businessmen, marketers, and creating that interdisciplinary team that allows you to be able to come up with ideas like this. And so with that, the next time you put your magnets on your refrigerator, think of DDG and how we're trying to reach 1 billion people. Thanks.
Shout out to John for an incredible innovation that is changing lives, a refrigerator magnet, and the impact that can have on saving 1 billion lives. You know, I can't wait to see how this rapid assessment of malaria does start impacting dengue fever, Ebola, and the other diagnoses for diseases around the world. I mean, that's tiny mosquito, the deadliest disease on the planet. Incredible, incredible. All right, so next up, we're going to talk about but I'm going to also show you the money. This is the panel that we've all been waiting for, especially me, because it's sort of a personal panel of sorts. In today's world, be it creative, corporate, or consumer capital, we all have something to contribute to getting the job done. So we have a great lineup of guests to talk about this important issue of finance. So here's my dear friend, Kate Ahern, the Vice President of Innovation at Case Foundation, sitting alongside my brother from another mother, Ricardo Michel, the Director of the Office of Transformational Partnerships at USAID, and joined by Donna Kellejohn, the Chief Business Officer at Global Giving, an organization that we all, if we don't know, we better know, and we can ask her about it.
Good.
The floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Didi. What Didi didn't say is that he used to be my boss at Pyxera. And so we're in different seats, but thanks for the intro. So I'm here today with two leaders in global development to talk about the really diverse set of resources that we need to be able to mobilize people, investments, grant dollars for global development. I'm here with Donna Kellejohn and Ricardo Michel. And I think if you've been watching this live stream or you've been paying attention to the agenda from the last 2 days at this conference, you'll notice how incredibly diverse this group of speakers has been. They're from nonprofits, they're from corporations, they're from universities, they're from government, they're from foundations, they're from all over the world. And I think that it's important to note that in this day and age, almost no one is going it alone when they're trying to solve the problems that are facing us all, and when they're trying to make progress toward first the MDGs and now the SDGs. So I'm going to ask Donna and Ricardo some questions about this new world of partnerships that we live in. And we'll sort of drill a little bit deeper into why we're doing this, into how we're doing this, and on sort of why does this matter as we're going forward and trying to make progress on the SDGs. So I think, Ricardo, I'll start with you. So USAID has sort of really expanded its partnerships work over the last 15 years. Mm-hmm. Indeed, you are the head of the Center for Transformational Partnerships. So I'd love if you could sort of tell us the story of why you think USAID started down this path of really beefing up its partnerships and sort of how it's going about it today.
Great. Thank you very much, Kate, and thank you for inviting me to be here. As far as USAID, we take partnership seriously. In fact, our mission reads, we partner to end extreme poverty and promote democratic, resilient societies while advancing our security and prosperity. So it's to the core of what we do. We also have a long-standing history of partnering, particularly with the private sector. If you think about our inception in the 60s, coming out of the Marshall Plan, we really helped stand up a number of economies and building business-enabling environments. And so if you look at South Korea today, they used to be former donor recipients. In the 90s, we've come around and we've helped Eastern Europe really transition to market-based economies. So today, we're working with the private sector even more deeply. You know, one of the things that we've seen, there's been some fundamental shifts in terms of the number of actors and the types of actors in the last 20 years. And we're watching these trends and responding accordingly to adapt. If you think about in 1970, US flows to the developing economy were about more than 90% official development assistance. Today, it's less than 9%. Mm-hmm. And if you look at it globally, it pales in comparison. You have all donor assistance going into developing countries is about 160 billion, right? If you look at private sector flows, foreign direct investment in these same economies, it's about it's about 600 billion. And if you look at domestic companies investing in their own economies, 3.7 trillion. Mm-hmm. So for us, we look at this lens and say, how do we work more catalytically to help mobilize these private sector resources that are already going in? So we've really taken a hard look at ourselves internally as well as externally. Now, we've made tremendous progress, obviously. Again, ending extreme poverty is tough, but we've seen the number of people living in extreme poverty since about 20 years ago has been cut in half. Now, what I posit is the remaining half is the tougher half. So this really means that we have to do development differently. So we're taking a look at how do we really engage, leverage not just the resources, but the skills and capabilities of the private sector to really help us achieve this audacious goal, as well as the SDGs. Mm-hmm. So that's something that we we really take a look at. We've begun to create more mechanisms to engage the private sector, de-risking environments where they want to ultimately have their commercial interests. We also partner to leverage their resources, and we're looking at how we manage those relationships. So when I talk about change internally, we've actually piloted a structure around relationship managers, where we're really taking a look at our key relationships, making sure that we have strategic discussions back and forth, which optimize the ultimate outcome. And more importantly, we're a little complex to work with, I hear. So it makes it a little easier to
None of
navigate.
us have ever experienced
No.
that.
We would never say it on camera.
But all of this is to one end, to really help advance our development objectives. And so for us, working with the private sector, quite honestly, is not an innovation. It's quite honestly a necessity. And so we continue to focus on the sweet spot where our development objectives align and intersect with commercial interests, because that's where we're going to see sustainable long-term impact.
And we just had Stan Litow speaking up here. I know that IBM has had partnerships with USAID. What's a partnership right now that you're particularly proud of or excited to sort of see where it's going to go?
Okay, I've got to answer this without upsetting all the other partners that I don't name. But suffice it to say, over the last decade, we've executed over 1,500 partnerships and with about 3,500 different partners. So a lot to choose from. But I think emblematic in the ones that are really successful is what I referred to earlier, really that alignment of our development goals and their shared interests, and the ability to bring in their core capabilities to whatever solution. And I'll give you an example of something that one of the partners think is effective. Obviously, food security, nutrition, economic growth, improving livelihoods are all critical to us. So we've been able to partner with Walmart. As you think about Walmart, they're one of the major consumers of produce from smallholder farmers all over the world. Now, Walmart actually has a goal to train 1 million farmers. Now, for us, we'd love our farmers and people we work with in these countries to have a sustainable market. We want them to practice sustainable agricultural husbandry and practices, as well as be able to improve their livelihoods. So by working with Walmart, we've actually been able to, through our Bureau for Food Security and their Feed the Future initiative, really partner in countries like Rwanda, Kenya, Tanzania, and train over 400,000 farmers, over which half of are women, and really think about how do we do this in a sustainable way. The beauty of this type of partnership going forward is it aligns in the commercial interests of someone like a Walmart, which means our funding can be catalytic as we provide specific technical assistance, but it's something that I would posit we're not going to necessarily have to continue to do in the long run. And what this means for development is really the effective allocation of our resources. As other issues arise, we're able to take those limited resources we have and continue to apply them to those issue areas.
So Donna, a lot of your work, I imagine, especially in sort of post-disaster settings, happens alongside USAID. And you're working to mobilize money from individuals, right? People like me, right? Who say, gosh, I really want to help, from foundations, from institutions, from corporations. What have you seen that's changed in terms of partnerships and in terms of giving in the last 10 or 15 years?
So I think one thing to realize is that the notion of crowdfunding really didn't exist 15 years ago. And so we like to think of ourselves as the original and only global crowdfunding platform. And so if you think about how much has changed since then, you now have many more crowdfunding platforms, right? We've got Kickstarter and Indiegogo and CrowdRise, and some of them are very domestically focused, but just a couple of weeks ago, Indiegogo announced that they were starting up generosity.com, which is very much focused on social impact-based fundraising and crowdfunding. And I think that changing landscape for engaging smaller, whether you call them investors or you call them donors, there are now a number of opportunities for people to support the work that rolls up to the SDGs through a number of platforms. Global giving is a little different from most of those, right? We're a public charity. We're not a for-profit. Many of the new entrants are for-profits, which kind of underscores the point of this conference about bringing different funding capacities and different capital structures to bear on the issues and the challenges we have. We are very much focused on the long-term effectiveness and social impact of the organizations that use our crowdfunding platform. So in addition to providing a mechanism for receiving funds, we're also providing them with tools and resources that allow them to learn. And there's been discussion, I think, at the top of the conference about learning as an important aspect of coming up with new solutions on an ongoing basis. So just that whole sort of crowdfunding environment has changed dramatically. And that's one example of technology enabling partnerships that are different. And you mentioned disaster, Kate. I'll give you an example that we've seen, in the response to the Ebola crisis last year, which was significantly different from how we responded. We as a sector and as a community responded to, say, even the tsunami in Japan, in the sense that there were app developers and technology executives who are also philanthropists really looking at how the use of mobile technology could radically alter the way in which cases were being identified, people were being tracked, how the nonprofit and health organizations were communicating and coordinating. And so that, again, is another platform for bringing about change in a more rapid way. And then I think the last thing that I would probably say is thinking about companies and how those partnerships have changed. I think when I started in the financial services world, too many years ago to count, we were a very philanthropic organization here in DC, but focused very much on DC. And of course, companies have shifted from really focusing on their headquarters and kind of large partnerships to a much more distributed set of mechanisms for supporting nonprofits, supporting social enterprises, and doing that very much aligned with their strategic goals, but also their employees' interests. And I think all of those things have shifted a lot.
And I love that you talk about the platform, and global giving is sort of an obvious version of a platform that helps people to do good. I think more and more we're talking about government as a platform that allows people to sort of come together, to work together, and to do good. And so, Ricardo, in this vein, we also talk a lot about sort of this combination of philanthropy, grant making, and also investments, right? More and more we're talking about impact investing as a tool, foreign direct investment as a tool. Can you talk, are there good examples through your work at USAID that you've seen where grants and investments have worked well alongside each other?
Sure, absolutely. We've taken a careful look at this because when you talk about that financing spectrum, there's different tools, mechanisms, and levels of effectiveness when you're talking at the micro level versus the macro level, where we're looking at really systemic change. So, as you mentioned, I lead the Center for Transformational Partnerships, and we, through our Global Development Alliance, really look at how we leverage private sector resources. But we also have a Development Credit Authority, and they provide loan guarantees, 50% guarantees to really unlock local capital through the financial institutions, which actually serves a different price point. And of course, we do our work in microenterprise. And most recently, we've launched the Private Capital Group, which really looks at large pools of capital, institutional capital. How are we mobilizing them towards our development objectives? And a lot of this actually comes to your point of impact investing. So through that spectrum, we've seen a lot of opportunity to combine strategically our grant capital alongside more traditional investment capital. I'll give you sort of two examples. So using the DCA example, we work with GE Healthcare specifically in Kenya. And as you can imagine, health clinics, small providers have difficulty accessing working capital. And through a DCA guarantee, we've actually been able to unlock capital and provide loans through Kenya Commercial Bank to a number of these health clinics. And the interesting part about working with GE Healthcare, this was so in line with what they wanted to accomplish, we actually have to pay for that. There's a premium, a risk premium to unlock that capital that we pay as a government institution. GE paid that. And so again, it just shows you when you're in alignment, there's the opportunity to really leverage. And now you have a number of clinics in Kenya providing accurate care. When you talk about impact investing, we're doing a lot. There's this pioneering gap we talked about yesterday a bit, where there's a lot of capital looking for investable opportunities, and on the other side you have a lot of entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, who are doing amazing things. I think we've heard some of the dev talks today, but they're in need of capital. So this pioneer gap is a very interesting space for us. And one program that my team leads is called PACE. It's partnering to accelerate entrepreneurship. And we actually made a $2 million grant to Village Capital. Now, Village Capital is an incubator, and our goal through PACE is to work with the intermediaries, the early stage investors, the incubators, and likewise, because I realize, and we all realize, we will not be able to fund our way entrepreneur or program by program out of these challenges. So how do we actually mobilize more private sector resources and investments into this space? Well, through PACE and working with these intermediaries, we're looking at building out the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And specifically in VilCap, they have an interesting peer-to-peer model, and alongside of that, they invest in the winners of the cohort. However, for a fund manager to operate, they need to generate or at least raise enough funds so that the management fees makes it sustainable. Now, this is a yet proven model. However, our funding went to take care of those operational costs. So this allowed VilCap to be up and running. In fact, they've just closed a round of about 15 million, and I think
Proud
proudly,
investors.
exactly,
Yep.
you're proud investors here. But overall, we've been able to mobilize about $30 million in this effort, all going towards impact investing, making sure that we're really helping the ecosystem in terms of these entrepreneurs being more successful in achieving their goals. So I think that those are sort of two examples that we see, but there are a plethora of ways in which we can be smart about using our limited dollars to really catalyze and mobilize private resources.
Very cool. Village Capital is a great example of a company and a nonprofit that's looking forward at all times. I think one of our favorite things about global giving at the Case Foundation is that Donna and her team and the whole global giving team are also looking forward and thinking about what's next. And so since you're here, I'd love to get sort of, what are your predictions for the next 10 years, 15 years? As we think about, okay, so we want to achieve the SDGs, we want to solve a lot of really critical challenges. What's next for global giving, and what do you think is next sort of for the field?
Wow, I have all of the answers, Kate.
Good. I'm glad she asked you.
I'm glad you left me to answer this, because it's so easy. So, I think Ricardo mentioned that so many people in poverty have had their circumstances, they have created the circumstances to move themselves out of poverty. And I think I use that frame purposefully, right? Because I think the way that we think about things at Global Giving is how important it is for the voice of the community to be part of this solution.
Absolutely.
And so we have very large institutional partners and friends and funders doing more innovative work than they have done ever in the past, without question. Companies are doing more innovative work than they have done. Foundations are beginning to very slowly, make those shifts. Case is an obvious exception, which has always operated very differently. But there is still so much to do, right? And we were talking earlier about what is the partnership imperative? How is that going to play out? And my only prediction is that I would point to an organization that I'm very knowledgeable about and work with, which is called Water for People. And Water for People works in a number of countries on water and sanitation. And the programming approach that they're taking, which is to get water and sanitation to everyone forever, is really a perfect example of the kinds of partnerships that I think are going to work in the future. And while they do work with large multinationals, the key points are essentially taking the feedback from the community, local nonprofit partners who are implementers, and creating sustainable business models and mechanisms for the community to own the solutions. Demonstrate those concepts, and then work with local governments, not just national governments, not just global entities, but they're working with local governments. And the way we're kind of thinking about this, and I think global giving is very similar, is there are so many mechanisms for how and the ways to get it done. Those ways have not yet come full circle to solving the problems. But we also have to build the will. And that will has to be not just in New York or Geneva or Washington, D.C., or in a session like this. It has to be at the community level. It has to be at the local level. It has to be at the regional level. And so those, to my way of thinking, those kinds of locally built up solutions that can then be taken and replicated or taken and scaled depending upon what makes sense in other communities is the only way we're going to solve our way into a more prosperous, situation for everyone in the world.
I love this idea of the top-down, bottom-up. And so, Ricardo, crystal ball. 15 years, we will have achieved all of the SDGs.
Absolutely.
What do you think needs to change, and what do we need to really drill down on to make sure that we can do that?
So I think representing a donor organization, it starts with us. We often talk about transforming the development enterprise, and we have to really take a hard look inside. And we've been doing that. And I have the pleasure of sitting in the Global Development Lab, which is really what we see as the tip of the spear for changing. And we can talk about a lot of the innovations that we've seeded, but one of the things I take most pride in is I look at the ideas that have come through the Development Lab in the last 3 to 4 years, which we've gotten over 5,000 submissions. For the ones that we've awarded, over 65% are people who have never done business with USAID before. And if you look at our grand challenges, over 50% of those ideas come from those in the local communities. So again, to your point, I agree with you wholeheartedly. So we have to start opening our aperture to allow for those types of ideas to come in and then give us the opportunity to help fund those and create the environments where they can be successful.
Well, I am wildly optimistic, and not just because we have folks like you who are leading the charge on this, but I think we're really in a different place than we used to be. I think folks are not thinking that we all need to stay in our lanes. The philanthropy needs to be philanthropy, and business needs to be business, and individuals need to be individuals. I think that there's a really different view now of how we all can work together on these challenges. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank all of you for being here, and we're onward to CD.
All right, fantastic. Let's give a round of applause. Kate mentioned that we used to work together. I didn't know she was clairvoyant or that she made people into soothsayers. But it's fantastic to hear about what those who are at the tip of the spear of giving, what they have to say about the future of financing in this space, where the money comes from, is so important to all of us. And just to recap some of that, I mean, the voice of the community to be part of the solution, so critically important. Philanthropic capital, public resources, private capital, crowdfunding. I love what global giving is doing. Each of us can take action right now to support an emerging endeavor, whether it's a project, a process, or a person. So check it out, globalgiving.org, to make your difference right now. One theme that came up in that presentation in that segment was technology. And now we want to take time to see an example of how technology is giving young people access to real skills and helping solve youth unemployment. And this following segment is generously supported by SAP.
These are SACLE's first lines of Scratch, a digital language that allows for a lot of creativity.
Scratch is a very fun thing to do and can just invite many children to be more interested in technology.
At SAP, we believe that giving young people like SACLE access to technology skills will change their lives and the world around them. That's why we partnered with Galway Education Centre to run the largest digital literacy initiative in Africa ever.
We're giving young people the opportunity to learn a whole new language that could make a whole difference to their lives and the lives of the continent of Africa.
As a leader in technology innovation, we understand this is a key to tackle the world's social issues. SAP works with young people around the world to foster ideas and projects that have the potential to solve the pressing problems of our planet. For instance, the Global Entrepreneurship Summer School, an initiative of 4 Munich universities and SAP, invited 30 of the globe's top students to solve youth unemployment. The goal is to find ideas that have sustainable impact.
We are building really cool projects that will actually have a real life impact on many different places in the world.
Social change requires innovation. SAP's technology, talent, and business expertise have the power to innovate society.
I'm not as experienced or equipped in processes and technology, but for someone to come in and look at it and just, kind of like, oh, this is it, and then tell me and put it all in a really, really concise, accurate, but very, very insightful plan is like heaven sent.
Making a difference takes many forms. It's the individual commitment that counts.
I was working with farmers who spoke very little English, and I had to learn how do they make money and what can we do for them to give them money faster. The social sabbatical changed my life.
Our employees invested almost 190,000 volunteer hours in 2014.
The skills we're learning here are skills that we could never learn at home. And these are things that we can take back to our jobs in SAP. So they're not just investing in these people here in Africa, they're investing in us as well.
Our biggest volunteering event is the Month of Service. In 2015, more than 550 employee volunteer activities were held in over 50 countries, each one a real-life opportunity to improve the lives of people in local communities. We have seen that talent, technology, and partnerships can change the world and our view of the world.
The late, great Whitney Houston is famous for the phrase and the song, "I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way." Well, I'm happy and excited about the work that SAP is doing to really provide technological skills to youth to help them lead the way. And so I'm excited to introduce Alicia Linza, the Vice President and Head of CSR at SAP, along with John Clifton, Managing Director of Global Analytics at Gallup, and John Ubang Silas, Senior Director of Programs and Engagement at LDI Africa. Lead the way.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having us here today. So our panel today is really here to talk about the opportunity and challenges of activating youth as we look at the global goals. And I think a good place to start is to talk about what we're talking about. The UN says that today there are more young people on the planet than at any time in history. We're talking about 1.8 billion young people, and a big part of this is sort of this millennial generation that everyone likes to talk about. And in many ways, the millennials have it really good. The SDGs did make a lot of progress in terms of getting more young people into schools than ever before. So, we're looking at a generation that's more educated, more connected than ever before in history. These are true digital natives in a lot of ways. But at the same time, young people these days are 3 times more likely to be unemployed than adults. We're looking at up to 90 million young people who are unemployed on the planet, although John is going to have some more details about those statistics. But really 85% are in the developing world, which is a huge challenge for us. From an SAP perspective, we are the largest enterprise software provider in the world. And what keeps us up at night is really thinking about this issue of youth unemployment, and at the same time, the huge anticipated gap in skills that we're going to need to educate people to be able to be part of our digital workforce. It's estimated that 40 million jobs are going to be missing in the IT sector by 2020. And we really actually see some danger of that even growing higher as the digital transformation is taking over all industries. So IT is not just IT. Every industry is turning into a digital industry, and that is a huge, huge challenge for us. So that's really why we put our focus around the topic of how can we give young people the skills they need to not just be productive in the digital economy, but also solve major issues that we're going to be looking at.
That's great. It's interesting because this is a discussion about activating youth. And if we are going to activate youth, it might serve us well if we understood what exactly it is that makes a great life for youth. And so Gallup actually did a study in 160 countries where we asked young people, what's the single biggest thing that would create a great life for you? And the single thing that they said, among all other issues, is to have a great job. But there's a challenge right now because how we quantify jobs and how we quantify the job situation is it grossly underestimates exactly what the problem is. Right now, the ILO, when you go to the ILO and say, what is global unemployment? They say it's 5.9%. When you look at data like levels of poverty, what percent of people live under $2 a day, it's half of the world. So when you compare that figure to 5.9% of adults who are unemployed, it drastically underestimates exactly what the problem is. So Gallup studied this issue, and we went out and we said, what is the real global jobs problem? And based on how we asked the questions, which are very similar to what the ILO does, we found that of the 3.2 billion people around the planet that actually want a good job, only 1.3 actually have a good job. But what that means is 1.9 billion don't. But the problem's worse, because in our research, we find that if you're in a job that you hate, your life is actually worse than someone who has no work whatsoever. And so somebody needs to go in and understand quality of jobs, and we did that. So we went in and asked people in a very subjective way whether or not they knew what they were supposed to do in their job, whether or not they had the materials and resources in order to do their job effectively, or whether or not they were able to use their strengths. And what we found, if you look at the people that have a good job, who actually have a great job, that number drops all the way to 161 million people who actually have a great job, which means over 3 billion people around the planet don't. And so what we need to do is not only get the data right for leaders, but also create solutions, not just to get people like they're a pair of hands to working. We need to get them jobs that are great jobs that use their strengths. And John, interestingly enough, you and I were talking about this outside just recently, but you're actually doing some of these things in Nigeria. So it might be interesting to hear from you about some of the things that you and your organization are doing to actually correct that global problem.
Okay, thanks. So in 2014, actually, I was able to be an LDI Africa Fellow. And what that is an opportunity through LDI Africa, is a nonprofit organization that provides service opportunities for mid-level professionals to go onto the continent and utilize their skill sets. I had the good fortune to be placed at an international boarding school, Alashere International, in Osun State, Nigeria. And my role there was to develop a global leadership curriculum for students. And so one of the fundamental aspects of the founder, who was the late Oba Alashere, was that he believed that service was a great vehicle for leadership development. And so with that, and also doing some research, I was able to develop a leadership development curriculum based on the social change model of leadership development. And basically, the social change model of leadership has two premises about leadership. One is that the only purpose of true leadership is to affect positive change. And then the second component is that in order to do that, you need to work in a collaborative space. And so through that, they go through 7 modules, which one begins in the individual component, then moves to the group dynamic, and then the last stage is a global citizen perspective, which ties into students conducting a social change project, meaning that they identify an issue there on the ground, and then they actually, as a group, work to solve or address that issue. And I'll give you an example of one of the projects that the students did. One of the things that Alashere has is a partnership with a local primary school. And so the students were tasked in helping teachers provide supplemental learning tools to enhance student engagement. One of the challenges that the local school had was that limited resources. And so the students took charge of that by meeting with teachers and understanding and trying to figure out how they could use resources that they created to help students be more engaged and, again, more attentive in class. One subject area that they focused on was Yoruba. Yoruba is a traditional language that's spoken in that area. What they found in looking at the textbooks that the students had, was that one, obviously, was outdated, and also, secondly, that in the context, it used examples in an urban setting or urban environment, which was strange or wasn't connected to the students because they lived in a very rural space. And so what they did, they took ownership of it and they actually created supplemental tools and gave examples and coloring and drawings and stuff like that. There was one particular girl, Fien, who just took ownership. She bought into the project and just led the way. We had frank conversations about asking why these students didn't have some of these resources, and I just saw the growth in her. And so at the end, they presented the tools that they had provided, and the children were really engaged. And she told me two things. One was that she realized that she didn't have to wait to be an adult to make an impact in their society. And the second thing she said was that it didn't take that much energy to contribute something tangible to their immediate community. So I thought that was very profound for a 16-year-old to really realize that. And I could see her projection now, starting up a nonprofit organization when she becomes older. But we have planted that seed in her, and I think that is one of the impacts that we can do early on.
Excellent.
Great. Yeah, I would maybe just sort of like to react a little bit to some of the information you shared about the Gallup study. When looking at making SAP an attractive employer for young people, that's obviously an important part of our long-term strategy to be able to get the best and the brightest to come and work for us. This issue of not just good jobs but great jobs and being able to provide that engaging environment is really front and center for us. When SAP sort of looks at setting out our corporate objectives, it's not just revenues, it's not just operating profit, it's not just customer success, but the fourth indicator we set for ourselves of success is employee engagement. And employee engagement is really everything you're talking about. Does this job, do I know what's expected of me? Is it fulfilling? Do I know what I'm going to do when I'm going to work? And does it make me happy? And that's one of our 4 corporate objectives, to reach a really high score on that. And we see that when our employees have opportunities to get engaged and have a job with purpose and make a difference, engage in activities where they go out and work with young people and improve people's lives and have real social impact, that has an effect on our bottom line because they are more engaged. And we measure this, and we know that they score 90% on employee engagement as opposed to 79% for an average employee. We've also taken the step of doing the connection between non-financial and financial results that says for every 1 percentage point change in employee engagement, that actually results in 35 to 45 million on our bottom line. So this idea of being able to offer great jobs to young people is part of our future success and is going to be an impact on how much money we make.
Yeah, definitely. John Ubang, you actually brought up a really interesting point, which is the comment that the young woman made in Nigeria when she said, "I don't need to wait till I'm an adult to make an impact on the world." And I think, as I mentioned earlier, what Gallup has found, the single biggest issue facing the world is jobs. What is it that young people can do now that would help address that problem? We found who are the job creators. At least in the United States, we found that over 60% of all new jobs created in America are created by shoot-ups, which are great entrepreneurs. And so what we would suggest is there are great entrepreneurs at very young ages. In fact, we go into schools in the United States and ask young people, would you like to be your own boss? Would you like to start your own business? Large amounts of young people say yes to that. By the way, at some point when they get older, they start to say no to that. What we need to do is tell those young people, you don't need to change that. And in fact, we need entrepreneurs more than ever right now. The reason for that is when you look at data from the census, for the first time in 40 years of tracking, more businesses are dying than they are being born. This is the first time that statistic has ever happened. So what we need is for those young people to help us solve the single greatest problem that's facing the planet today is to start new businesses. So that would be my contribution to that portion of the conversation. And it would be interesting to hear more about what you see in terms of that issue, entrepreneurship, in Nigeria and the work that you've done throughout the region.
Well, I think entrepreneurship is definitely a vehicle to addressing the skill gaps and the opportunity for employment for the youth. However, I would like to talk about something that is often not talked about that is aligned with the skills gap, and that is the opportunity gap. Before the youth are able to sometimes take full advantage of these opportunities, there are sometimes social, cultural, economic, environmental challenges that prevent them or inhibit them from taking full advantage of these opportunities. For example, in terms of in the area of vocational training, which is something that is being done very much so in Africa. I'll give you an example of one organization that's trying to address that, and it's Wave Academy, which is in Nigeria. And it was started by a diasporan who came back, returned, and what she's trying to do, the organization's trying to do, is provide that pathway to localize the curriculum. So no matter how great the program training is, if you don't address some of those local challenges or issues, then the youth will not have the ability to take full advantage of these opportunities. So in the space that she works in, it's hospitality. And so in Nigeria, it's a booming space. So there's a lot of hotels coming up in Victoria Island, okay? Now, individuals that are working in that to try and get in that industry live primarily very far out in the outskirts. So one of the challenges that she identified was that, and wasn't talked about, was the logistical nightmare that is Lagos, okay? From getting from point A to point B is extremely challenging. So then how would that impact? And individuals who, again, trying to get to those jobs on a regular basis, what type of resources, what type of mechanisms can they put in place to ensure that, again, timeliness, which is a factor, a critical factor for employment success, can be at least mitigated or minimized for the early start. So these are just some things that I think individuals and organizations who many times have the heart, good intentions, great program design, but they overlook that opportunity gap and addressing that opportunity gap.
Just one other point on that is you talked a little bit about the environments for people that might be would-be entrepreneurs. And it's so interesting because we ask a question around the world, which is in the city or area where you live, is it easy for entrepreneurs to start a business? Now, you might think that America does very well on that, and some developing countries don't do very well on that. But the answer is that one of the countries that scores the highest in the entire world on whether or not it's easy to start a business, China. Overwhelming majority of people actually respond yes to that in the city or area where they live, it's easy to start a business. So that's one of those factors I think that young people could be thinking about is how do they create a better condition for great new organizations to start and help change the world. We, interestingly enough, did you want to react to that?
No, it's okay.
Oh, I was going to say, we've had some folks on Twitter that have been asking us a few questions. So I thought I might start with this question from the Model UN from Washington, which is, what is the greatest natural threat to sustainable development outside of climate change?
All right, well, that's a pretty big one, but I think we'll keep it in line with this conversation. And actually, I think Angela Merkel has also said this. I really think it's youth unemployment. I think giving young people opportunities, particularly as we see this amazing demographic change, is going to be crucial. And not just from an economics opportunity standpoint, but from also a safety and security standpoint. We need to be getting people into good jobs where they feel like they have opportunities for their life.
John Ubong, do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, maybe I can ask you a follow-up question. This one comes from Namdi Umuna from Nigeria, and she says, students in most of our universities have some hours of vital time every week. How can they channel these hours to the SDGs? What can they do?
Well, absolutely. I think the model that I talked about, the social change project, identifying things that they're passionate about and coming into it as a group and addressing those things. I think sometimes we wait for an external agent to address some of the critical issues. And again, once you start in that process, you find and realize that it's not the energy needed to exert to actually make a tangible impact is not as great as you think. And once you start the momentum, it will grow and evolve and continue. And I think the hardest thing many times for youth and people in general is to make that first step. Yep. Is to try. And it's okay if it's not at first successful. It's okay, but you need to do something. Try. So that would be my advice.
Alicia, just that same question, but students in America who might have idle time, what contributions could they make to the SDGs?
Well, I mean, it's the same thing. Get out and try. There was a young woman on a panel yesterday who had really talked about how volunteering really changed her life. And she had gone on to the United Nations volunteer platform and found some projects where she just started working there. But for us here in the US, there's so many opportunities to work with local organizations on challenges that you personally feel passionate about. Because unless you feel a personal connection to it, it's not going to be sustainable.
Alicia, this one's actually specifically for you from one of the Twitter accounts. But what is the approach of corporate volunteerism to create attitudinal changes and also make them sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, I think corporate volunteering has so much potential, particularly as we look at what's the role of corporations in addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. Going back to what John Ubong was saying, it's getting people to take that first step and having a corporate volunteering experience that they really feel is transformational and gets them engaged and excited. And that doesn't always necessarily have to be I'm going to go out and work in the emerging market for 1 month. It can be doing something locally and then working your way up to it. But we know that particularly with our employees that take part in the longer term pro bono engagement opportunities, they come back and report, very clear progress in terms of leadership skills and competencies and intercultural awareness, which is incredibly valuable for us as a company, and I think, helps us make that social impact we want to see in the world.
Absolutely. Well, it looks like we're being signaled that our time is up, so I will turn it then quickly to our moderator.
Okay, well, thank you for a wonderful, wonderful panel and presentation. I mean, the topic of activating youth is central. And as we heard, the single biggest issue facing society right now is jobs. Outside of climate change, the hashtag Earth to Paris is there, but this was a fascinating panel. We heard things about great jobs. What is it? A job that is fulfilling, that makes me happy, a job that has joy and purpose. And that leads to greater employee engagement, even through corporate volunteerism and other things. Fantastic panel sponsored by SAP. So now comes the hardest part of the program for me, because I have to bid you adieu. And before I do that, I just have the honor and the privilege to introduce our hostess with the mostest, I would say, the person who made it all possible. My dear friend, sister, mentor, partner in crime, a lot of other accolades I can bestow upon her, but none other than Pyxera Global CEO, Deirdre White. Thanks, Deirdre.
CD, thanks so much for doing such a great job emceeing this, and thanks for that introduction. I'm not sure I can live up to it at this point, but just wanted to close you out with the last few words today. You heard from me a few times earlier today, but I thought that it was valuable to bring together some of the lessons, not only of the broadcast today, but also that we've learned over the last few days that we've spent together here in DC, those of us who were at the SDG Forum. We began today talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, and here they are in their entirety. And it's really important for you all to take a look and to look at the 17 goals and to understand that these are enormous goals. It's a huge task for us to take on, and 15 years is a very short period of time in which to be able to take them on. One of the things that we did at Pyxera Global when we were really overwhelmed by these goals at the outset was that we decided to take them apart. We actually took the UN's proposal, and several of us sat down and we cut it up into little strips. And we cut it up into these strips, and we had an arts and crafts project going on in my office where we were taping from whiteboard to whiteboard, rearranging these things. And we were trying to find a way to simplify this. And we simplified into this particular Venn diagram. It was a way for us to be able to get our heads around the enormity of the task. And what we did was we said, okay, these fall into 4 general categories. Human rights, they fall into the category of human and natural environment. We have economic opportunity and employment, and we also have health. It's really important that these are overlapping circles because these problems don't exist in a vacuum. They're very much interrelated. And one of the problems that happens in the whole space of international development is that we look at things in a silo. We think that we can solve the problem of hunger without looking at, we think we can solve problems with healthcare without looking at hunger and nutrition. We think that we can solve employment issues without looking at education. So this particular diagram gives us an opportunity to look at where the overlaps are. And in a perfect world, every project that anyone's working on would sit in multiple goal areas because we have to be considering multiple goals. So it's an enormous task. It's a complicated task. If you look at the goals themselves, one of the biggest dangers of these goals is that we're looking at them not as a vision, but as a checklist. And I had an opportunity the other day to be having a conversation with the head of international development for one of the largest companies in the world. And what she said to me was that she gathered information from everyone around the world that was running projects in their different country offices. And she gathered that information to find out what they were already doing toward these goals. And what she found out was that they were doing something about every single goal. Oh, hunger? Yes, absolutely. Health? Yes, absolutely. And she went down and she checked off the 17 things they were doing and felt really good about the company. Until a few days later, when she was sitting in a room with a bunch of other companies. And what she found out was that every one of those other large companies was checking off the list as well. And every one of those other large companies had hit all 17 points. So the caution here is that the SDGs cannot be a checklist. We need to keep the SDGs in their proper place as a vision. The SDGs cannot become a checklist because the world cannot afford for that to happen. So how do we avoid their becoming a checklist? Well, there's three main ways that I think that we can avoid it. The first one is with the right mindset. The second one is with the right problem definition. And the third one is with the right partnerships. Mindset's really important. And one of the things that is important to Pyxera Global is the way that we talk about our work. I've been working in this space that a lot of you would describe as international development for almost 3 decades now, my entire career. And I actually object to the term international development. Development is something you do to someone or something. At Pyxera Global, we talk about purposeful global engagement. Global engagement is something you do with someone or something. And it seems like maybe that's just words. But nomenclature really does matter because nomenclature drives mindset. So what does purposeful global engagement mean? It means we listen and learn. And I mean really listen and learn. We're not coming in with preconceived notions and then trying to find information that supports those preconceived notions. It means we lead and that we're willing to be led. We talk an awful lot about leadership and the importance of leadership skills, but boy, do we need some followership skills. It's really important that we know when to lead and when to follow. Purposeful global engagement has no place for third world. I really object to the term third world. It's about one world. And it's about whether people are hungry in Sao Paulo or San Francisco. It's about whether people are healthy in Delhi or Detroit. It's about equal access is about whether girls have desks in classrooms in Asia, but it's also whether faculty have access to positions in Africa. It's whether women have access to boardrooms in North America. These are issues that are not about one world versus another. They're not about North versus South. These are global issues. And if we haven't already realized that we're all in this together, and if we don't understand how much what's going on in other countries affects us here, the Ebola crisis should have brought it all to clear light. We ignore the well-being of people in other countries and other communities at our own peril. And if we weren't watching how fast the polar ice caps were melting, we know we are all quite literally in the same boat now, or in the not too distant future. These are global problems. We have to tackle them in global ways. And one of the ways to do that is by changing our mindsets and thinking about engagement rather than development, thinking about with rather than to. The second thing is problem definition. So when you look at that set of goals and you see all 17, you're thinking, okay, I gotta pick one, I gotta pick a goal. I'm encouraging you not to pick a goal, pick a problem. Pick one single problem that you think you might be able to have an impact on. Pick something you deeply care about. Think about the resources you have to bring to affect that problem, and then go about finding the partners to help you do that. A couple of thoughts on solvable problems. You heard three amazing social entrepreneurs today. You heard Scott, and you heard John, and you heard Shabita talk about what they did. They identified a problem, and they went out and they created a social enterprise to identify that, to address that problem. A solvable problem that we're looking at today is post-harvest loss. We know that we have a solution to this problem. Post-harvest loss refers to the amount of produce that's lost from the time that it should be harvested to when it gets to those store shelves. We're not talking here about the cucumber that rots in your refrigerator drawer, or the spaghetti that you put too much on your plate and you throw it down the garbage disposal. This is post-harvest loss that happens when the tomatoes rot on the trucks going from the field to the market. It happens when the mango farmer grew mangoes that aren't of the right quality for the mango juice provider, and there's no secondary market for it. And we grow enough food today to feed the entire world. We already grow enough food to feed the entire world. If we captured this loss, we could feed almost 2 billion more people a year. It's an entirely solvable problem. We know what to do about it. We just need to bring the right people and the right resources and get them to focus on this problem. The skills gap problem, you heard a lot about today from IBM and from SAP and some of their pioneering solutions. We know how to solve this problem. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. It's going to take a ton of resources, but we know how to solve this problem. So let's identify a single problem. Let's focus, and let's each put our best resources toward the problems that matter to us and that we can affect most. And of course, we can't go it alone. So the last thing is partnership. And partnership is something you heard a lot of talk about today. No one can do it alone. We heard about some of the challenges of partnership. But one thing that's important to talk about is the courage that it takes to have a real partnership. The courage that it takes to actually be able to let go of some of your own needs and desires in the interest of making something work together. The courage, if you're a donor, if you're the person writing the check, to feel like you're not in the position of control and to actually let some of the control go to the implementing partner, if you will. We have to get rid of these different definitions. It takes courage to have a partnership because you have to disagree. You have to be willing to disagree. And I'm often known to say that if you never wanted to strangle your partner, it probably isn't a real partnership. But that's a really uncomfortable space to be in. Over the last couple of days, we talked a lot about gray space. And it was so interesting to me that gray space came up in a really positive light. Normally, you think of gray space as being a place where we lost our moral compass, where someone couldn't decide what was black and white. But we're realizing more and more every day that everyone's black and white are different. And so when you're trying to forge a partnership, we're all going to have to get comfortable living in the gray space, and not get comfortable because it's a bad thing, but get comfortable because it's a good thing. So I challenge you all to embrace the gray. Finally, I've given you some assignments about changing mindset and about finding the right partnerships and getting comfortable with those, and about defining your problem and solving it. We want to know, what are you going to do today? What are you going to do tomorrow and next week and next month to help to drive progress toward that vision of a better world? So please share with us on Twitter at the hashtags you see on screen. We want to know what you're going to do. Thank you so much for tuning into this broadcast, and I hope that you learned something. I hope you were inspired, and I hope you're going to take action this afternoon, not even wait till tomorrow.